Chapter 184. Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu discussed the serious issue of character as they walked back slowly. Since he knew that he would be able to enter the fourth round safely and easily without having to do anything himself, why wouldn't he do it? Zhang Xiaohua was in an incomparably relaxed mood. It was rare for him to hum a country tune. Zhang Xiaohu listened carefully. "Sister, you sit at the bow of the boat. Brother will walk on the shore." He couldn't help but be stunned and thought to himself, since when did Guozhuang House have such a song? Why haven't I heard of it before? When the two of them returned to their original spot, the third round of the competition was nearing its end. Many disciples were hiding at the side to adjust their breathing. Zhang Xiaohu was envious and said softly, "Xiaohua, look at how good they are. They are so young and yet they have the opportunity to practice the profound inner force mantras and exquisite fist techniques. When we were so young, we were still busy helping father and mother in the fields." Zhang Xiaohua didn't think much of it and shook her head slightly. "Second brother, everyone has their own path and it's not the same. They may have a glimpse of the mysteries of martial arts, but they also lost the opportunity to enjoy the happiness of being with their family. As the ancients said, between gains and losses, who knows if it's a blessing or a curse?" She then comforted Zhang Xiaohu and said, "Now, second brother, look, you have your hero Wen to teach you martial arts. As for me, I have my own fist of the North Star and ethereal steps. Yes, there's also the reckless bull force that you gave me. Compared to when we first came to Pingyang City, it's a world of difference. As a person, one must be content with what one has." Zhang Xiaohu nodded and said, "Yes, no matter what, we are bumpkins from the countryside. It's not easy for us to come this far. It's better to have a grateful heart." Zhang Xiaohua turned to look at Zhang Xiaohu and said, "It seems that second brother understands." "That's right." Zhang Xiaohu let out a long sigh and said, "Whether I want to or not is not a problem. Whether I can think through it or not is a very realistic problem. Since Master accepted me as his disciple, he naturally taught me martial arts. Otherwise, he wouldn't have stood up in front of so many people. There must be a reason for this period of neglect. I'll just be myself. Who cares about the vicissitudes of life in this world? Good job, second brother." Zhang Xiaohua clapped her hands and praised, "Then, do you still want to close the door to your courtyard?" Zhang Xiaohu's face was calm as he said, "Closed is open, open is closed, why bother about it?" "What?" Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. "If it's closed, then it's closed. If it's open, then it's open. How is it as contradictory as you say?" Zhang Xiaohu also explained in a low voice, "You will naturally understand in the future." While the two brothers were talking, they heard another round of numbers being called out in the field. The last round of the second round of the martial arts exhibition had finally begun. Zhang Xiaohu patted Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder and encouraged her, "Xiaohua, this is already the last round. Do your best. Whether you win or lose, you have left a solid footprint in the martial arts exhibition." Zhang Xiaohua patted the dust off her butt and grinned, "Second brother, just watch me." Before the two of them reached the field, they heard a drawn-out voice from inside, "Number 250, where are you? Come quickly." Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu looked at each other and quickly ran inside. Now that the martial arts exhibition had entered the last round of the second round, there were only 32 disciples in the entire Kitty Hawk Hall who had advanced. The last round of the competition started at the same time and there were only 16 matches. In other words, there were only 16 matches in the arena. Naturally, these arenas were all concentrated in the center. At this time, there were already a lot of people gathered around these 16 arenas and they were all looking forward to the exciting matches. Zhang Xiaohua responded as she ran towards the arenas inside. Zhang Xiaohu also followed behind, but when he passed by the arena where the previous match had taken place, he was still very careful. He ran over and carried the escalator on his back. What a joke, this was a necessity for Zhang Xiaohua to enter the arena. As her second brother, if he didn't worry about it, who else could he count on? Although Zhang Xiaohua didn't learn Qinggong, this guy's running speed wasn't slower than others. When Zhang Xiaohu turned around again, he had already disappeared. Fortunately, the square was filled with little radishes. With Zhang Xiaohu's height, he wasn't afraid that he couldn't find Zhang Xiaohua's figure. Of course, look over there, isn't that Zhang Xiaohua? She stood anxiously under the arena, looking left and right, waiting for the magic weapon to enter the arena. Zhang Xiaohu hurriedly pushed aside the disciples who were watching the fun. Under everyone's surprised eyes, he placed the escalator on the arena. Seeing this situation, a burst of whispers burst out. Needless to say, they were all talking about the function of the escalator. Zhang Xiaohua's face had never been as red as it was today. She secretly made up her mind that the first thing she would do when she returned to Huanqi Mountain Villa was to quickly master this Qinggong. Otherwise, she couldn't afford to lose face when she went out. Under everyone's gaze, Zhang Xiaohua walked up the escalator to the arena. Zhang Xiaohua's opponent for the last round had already been waiting on the arena. This was a young man who looked very simple and honest. His body was muscular and he was also very tall. He was even taller than Zhang Xiaohua by a head. If Zhang Xiaohua didn't know that only he, Shen Guanyun, and Yu Dei were wild cards, she would have already gone forward to ask about the origin of the opponent. When Zhang Xiaohua stood on the arena, the leader under the arena shouted, "You can start." So the disciple opposite Zhang Xiaohua cupped his hands and saluted, and said in a low muffled voice, "I'm Tang Shi, a disciple of young Eagle Hall. Please take care of me, senior martial brother." Zhang Xiaohua naturally also cupped his hands and saluted. Then the two of them made a fighting pose. When Tang Shi saw that Zhang Xiaohua was ready, he said, "Senior martial brother Zhang, I'm a little strong. Please be careful." After saying that, he raised his big fist and smashed it towards Zhang Xiaohua. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she laughed in her heart and thought, this Tang Shi seems to be the same as Shernyo. They both practice external martial arts. Looking at his personality, he must be a straightforward man like Shernyo. During Zhang Xiaohua's martial arts practice journey in the Misty School, all the opponents she met were all inner disciples who were good at internal martial arts. Zhang Xiaohua thought that external martial arts had withered away in the Misty School and it was difficult to find outstanding disciples. Unexpectedly, she met one in the last round. She didn't need to think to know that the opponent in front of her must be extremely outstanding. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to enter the last round of the second round with just external martial arts. However, Zhang Xiaohua was also very proud of her strength. Seeing the opponent's fist approaching, she didn't dodge. She also leaned forward and clenched her fist to meet it. That Tang Shi's fist was actually bigger than Zhang Xiaohua's fist by a size. With a peng sound, the two fists collided. A huge force came through and Zhang Xiaohua's body was unsteady. She took 4 steps back before she could steady herself. Slightly shaking her sore arm and wrist, Zhang Xiaohua looked at the opponent in front of her again. That Tang Shi was also surprised. His previous opponents were all senior and junior brothers who he was familiar with. Almost all of them dared to exchange blows with him. Even those disciples who had profound internal martial arts were the same. The unfamiliar disciple in front of him looked very weak and actually dared to exchange blows with him. To be honest, he was afraid that he would injure his opponent and had already reduced his strength. However, Zhang Xiaohua wasn't injured and only took a few steps back. As for himself, he also took 2 steps back. The key point was that Zhang Xiaohua only shook her hand, but Tang Shi felt that his wrist and fist were already somewhat numb. Tang Shi also raised his head and looked at the unremarkable opponent in front of him again. The two people's gazes met on the stage and sparks flew between them. Seeing the surprise, respect, and dissatisfaction in each other's eyes, the two people suddenly felt that heroes cherished heroes. Shortly after, the two people slightly narrowed their eyes and shouted at the same time. Both of them quickly stepped forward and their fists collided. The crowd below the stage heard nearly 10 consecutive peng 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 sounds on the stage. When they looked again, the two people on the stage had already pulled apart a certain distance. Both of them were using their left hand to continuously massage their right hand. Their mouths were breathing in cold air with a hee-hee sound. Presumably, both of their right hands were in pain. Seeing such a situation, the crowd below the stage couldn't help but be surprised. The sound of discussion once again rose. What kind of person was Tang Shi? How good was his martial arts? The disciples below the stage and the leader had a thunderous reputation. Not to mention his martial arts, there were very few disciples in the Young Eagle Hall who could compare to him in terms of the strength of his hands. Today, a thin and ordinary youth had actually used his fists to collide with him more than 10 times and was actually not at a disadvantage. This was really beyond everyone's expectations. As for the other disciples who had seen Zhang Xiaohua compete, or had competed with Zhang Xiaohua before, they had looked down on Zhang Xiaohua before. The result of 9 fights and 9 draws in the first round was really not convincing. In the eyes of the disciples in the second round, all of the previous matches had relied on tricks to win and had a very unfair taste to them. In this exchange of fists with Tang Shi, Zhang Xiaohua's strength was ironclad. Just the strength of his arms was enough to make people have a whole new level of respect for him. However, this strength didn't represent martial arts. Zhang Xiaohua was very clear on this point. To be honest, in the exchange of fists just now, he was really half a notch inferior. Zhang Xiaohua also had a trace of understanding. No wonder the strength of his arms couldn't enter the eyes of the Misty School. Just a 10-year-old disciple from the Young Eagle Hall had strength that was not below his, not to mention those disciples who were already at the same level. His strength was really nothing in the eyes of the Misty School. On the opposite side, Tang Shi saw that pure strength wasn't enough to truly subdue Zhang Xiaohua. He stood up again, his left hand formed a palm and his right hand clenched into a fist. He attacked with the mighty King Kong hand. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. He also raised his fist to meet the attack, using the Big Dipper magical fist to fight the enemy. The two of them fought for a while, but there was still no clear victor. The incense stick was already half burnt. With Zhang Xiaohua's limited fighting experience, he had used his strength and fists to force the opponent to run for his life in the previous few rounds. However, this time, the opponent was using this method to force him to the point where he couldn't gain the upper hand. Hence, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes turned and he withdrew the Big Dipper magical fist. His footsteps suddenly became graceful and his body became light. He used the ethereal steps and followed Tang Shi's moves, evading them in an incomparably elegant manner. Zhang Xiaohua's switch from offense to defense didn't cause any reaction from the disciples below the stage who hadn't fought with him. Those disciples who had suffered under his ethereal steps had faces full of grief and indignation. They all said, "This bastard is at it again. It's that despicable and shameless footwork again." And the disciple who had fought with him in the second round was also present. He was in even more pain as he shouted loudly, "Plagiarism, plagiarism, plagiarism again." Roaming defensive tactics were indeed not uncommon in the martial arts exhibition. However, this was only limited to the first round. The second round didn't have a draw. If one was always at a disadvantage, even if it was a draw in the end, it would still be considered a failure. And the disciples who had entered the second round were all outstanding disciples. Their martial arts standards weren't too far off. Most of the disciples were willing to face their opponents head-on and very few of them would use qinggong to roam. Last time, Zhang Xiaohua's opponent had used the roaming tactic so easily that he was considered a failure. Now that Zhang Xiaohua had used it, many people couldn't understand. However, Zhang Xiaohua's roaming technique was different from others. The Misty School's disciples who used roaming techniques to avoid their opponent's attacks all used qinggong. Qinggong consumed internal energy, but it was less than the opponent's blindly attacking. Zhang Xiaohua didn't know any internal energy. What he used was the ethereal steps. It was just a type of qigong technique and pure footwork. It didn't consume any internal energy at all. The reason why Zhang Xiaohua picked up the ethereal steps again wasn't because his Big Dipper fist was inferior to the mighty King Kong palm. It was because he thought that in the 4 rounds of the second round, he had just taken a bye. He heard from Steward Su that he also had a bye in the second round. Tang Shi's character wasn't good enough to take a bye in the second round. Therefore, Tang Shi should have already gone through 3 rounds of fierce battles. Tang Shi was using an external cultivation technique and wasn't able to regulate his breathing and recover his physical strength. Presumably, he wouldn't be able to recover through punching like himself. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua was certain that Tang Shi's physical strength had been greatly depleted. If he were to go head-to-head with him, due to his strength and fist techniques, he might be at a disadvantage. Since that was the case, he might as well show weakness now and use guerrilla tactics to deplete his physical strength once again. He would then save up enough energy to give him a head-on blow at the second incense stick's time. He believed that it would have a miraculous effect. Zhang Xiaohua's thoughts weren't wrong. Tang Shi attacked for a while and didn't manage to touch a single hair on Zhang Xiaohua's body. He couldn't help but feel dejected. His footsteps became heavy and the wind from his punches also weakened. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua immediately gave up on the ethereal steps and raised his fist to attack. Tang Shi was shocked and hurriedly withdrew his mind and strengthened his attacks. When Zhang Xiaohua saw that Tang Shi's moves were fierce, he immediately executed the ethereal steps. After a few rounds, Tang Shi was exhausted. This exhaustion wasn't just physical strength, it was also mental strength. As for Tang Shi, after the previous 3 matches, he had exhausted all his strength. He didn't have the method to recover his strength easily like Zhang Xiaohua. In this last match, he was strong on the outside but weak on the inside. Especially in the first few exchanges of punches, his strength had been greatly depleted. In fact, his calculations were also very good. He wanted to concentrate his strength and knock his opponent off the stage in the early stages. But as it happened, Zhang Xiaohua actually used guerrilla tactics when he gathered his strength and prepared to fight head-on. When the enemy was tired, she would disturb him. When the enemy advanced, she would retreat. This made Tang Shi's heart burn with anger. He gradually felt that the strength in his body was slowly draining away. He was really tired and wanted to end the battle with a punch. However, he was facing Zhang Xiaohua who was as slippery as a loach. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't land a punch on her body. Very quickly, the incense stick burned out. The other incense stick was also burning halfway. Zhang Xiaohua and Tang Shi glanced at the incense stick at the same time. The 2 of them had 2 different thoughts at the same time. Tang Shi was delighted. Ever since he entered the stage, he had always been in an advantageous position. Even if Zhang Xiaohua increased her attacks in the last half an incense stick's time, as long as he could withstand it and achieve a draw, this match would be considered his victory. Needless to say, if that was really the case, this match would be a replica of Zhang Xiaohua's previous victory. Zhang Xiaohua saw that there was still half an incense stick's time left. She was also delighted. Tang Shi's strength was almost depleted while she still had a large portion of her strength. With this difference, she already had the advantage. If she didn't attack now, when would she? As a result, Zhang Xiaohua stopped using the ethereal steps and waved her fist. Although Tang Shi was tall and strong, he wasn't a brainless person. He immediately dodged. However, his light body technique wasn't strong and he didn't have the ethereal steps technique. With just a few steps on the stage, where could he dodge to? In just a few moves, he was immediately forced to a corner of the stage by Zhang Xiaohua. If he didn't exchange blows, he would be forced out of the stage. As a result, Tang Shi could only grit his teeth and risk his life to compete with Zhang Xiaohua. Tang Shi was indeed a genius. At the final juncture, the strength of his fist and the momentum of his moves didn't lose out to Zhang Xiaohua at all. In just a few moves, he forced Zhang Xiaohua to retreat a few steps. However, with the feeling of exchanging blows with Tang Shi earlier, Zhang Xiaohua already knew that Tang Shi was already at the stage of a thief fleeing the building. As long as she put in a little more effort, she would be able to defeat him. Zhang Xiaohua's spirit rose. Her fists were like raindrops hitting banana leaves. Tang Shi could only parry and had no strength to fight back. But even in this storm-like attack, Tang Shi was still tenacious. No matter how much strength Zhang Xiaohua exerted or how she attacked, he only focused on parrying and quietly waited for the final moment to arrive. Tang Shi wasn't in a hurry, but Zhang Xiaohua was naturally anxious. He didn't want to repeat the same mistake and be eliminated with a draw. So he took a deep breath and attacked even harder. His fists hit the places where Tang Shi had to parry. Step by step, he forced him to the edge of the stage. Tang Shi's back was facing the stage. Although he couldn't see the scene behind him, he had retreated a lot and had a rough idea. Moreover, there were many Tang Shi's fellow apprentices below the stage. From time to time, someone would remind him, "You can't push anymore. You will be forced out in 4 or 5 steps." Tang Shi might dodge, but Zhang Xiaohua was determined this time. He didn't give him any chance to dodge, and he didn't have any more strength in his body. It was already very strenuous to parry Zhang Xiaohua's fists, let alone force him to retreat. Seeing that he was at the edge of the stage, Zhang Xiaohua was secretly happy. He gathered all the strength in his body and shouted, "You can go down now." As he spoke, he used all the strength in his body to punch Tang Shi's chest. "Please collect, thank you." Chapter 185. Just as Zhang Xiaohua's fist was about to hit Tang Shi's body, no matter if Tang Shi raised his hand to meet it or if Zhang Xiaohua hit his body, Tang Shi would inevitably be knocked out of the ring by Zhang Xiaohua. But looking at Zhang Xiaohua's punch that was sure to succeed in one battle, Tang Shi actually calmed down and raised his right fist to meet it. But when the two fists collided, he suddenly changed his fist into a palm. Using his right palm to meet Zhang Xiaohua's fist, he leaned to one side and used all the strength in his body to grab Zhang Xiaohua's fist. Taking advantage of the momentum, Zhang Xiaohua's body involuntarily rushed past Tang Shi's side and straight out of the ring. Wasn't this the same technique that Nya Little Fool had used on Zhang Xiaohua back then? This technique of 4 ounces deflects 1,000 caddies was quite effective against opponents with greater strength than him. However, it was also a relatively advanced technique. Because Tang Shi's strength was great, when he fought with internal experts, he often encountered situations where he was called by others. Thus, as he fought, he got used to it. He also had some experience with this technique, but after all, his internal strength wasn't very deep, and his use of internal strength was far less flexible than others. Thus, although he knew how to use it, he had never actually used it, and he also didn't expect to have the opportunity to practice it. After all, in the Misty School's Kitty Hawk Hall, no one had more strength than him, so it wasn't worth him calling. But today, he met Zhang Xiaohua, who actually had the same strength as him. In the 4th round of the competition, his strength was almost exhausted, but Zhang Xiaohua still had strength. In the end, she actually forced him into a corner. It was Zhang Xiaohua's last punch that instantly made him remember this technique that he had never practiced before. Thus, Tang Shi also treated a dead horse as a living horse. He turned around and used the method that others often used against him on Zhang Xiaohua. Unfortunately, Zhang Xiaohua was also inexperienced and fell for the trick. When his body was pulled to Tang Shi's side, he shouted in his heart, I've been tricked." But at this time, he wanted to stabilize his body, but it was already impossible. The two of them used their strength together, just like how Zhang Xiaohua and Tang Shi pushed Zhang Xiaohua together, pushing him out of the arena. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua pass by his side, Tang Shi hurriedly let go of his hand and retracted his arm. His eyes could not help but follow his arm as it left Zhang Xiaohua's figure. In his heart, since Zhang Xiaohua had gone up the escalator, her qigong was not as good as his. Since her figure had already left the arena, how could she come back? Even if Zhang Xiaohua's qinggong was top-notch, once he left the arena, there would be no place for him to borrow strength. How could he return from outside the arena? But just as he turned his head, before he could turn around, he heard a cry of surprise from behind, "Be careful." Tang Shi hurriedly turned his head back, but did not see any abnormality. In the empty area of the arena, there was no trace of Zhang Xiaohua. His heart was set, and just as he was about to cup his fist to the people below the arena, he felt a huge force coming from his shoulder. He could no longer control his body and rushed out from the place where Zhang Xiaohua had rushed out of the arena. Tang Shi fell out of the arena and only slightly adjusted his unbalanced body in the air before he immediately stood on the ground below the arena. When he turned back to look at the arena again, Zhang Xiaohua, who should have been pushed off the arena by him, was standing steadily on the arena and happily cupping his fist to the people below the arena to thank him. Tang Shi's face was filled with confusion. In fact, just as Tang Shi had pushed Zhang Xiaohua off the arena, Zhang Xiaohua's figure had already left the edge of the arena. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua was regretting that she had been tricked. Her mind was spinning non-stop, trying to salvage the situation. But she did not know qinggong at all, so how could she turn back in the air? But at this critical juncture, Zhang Xiaohua immediately thought of the floating technique of the third level of the ethereal steps. That day when she was thrown out of the arena by leader Chang, there was already a tendency for her to float. If she did not use it now, when would she? Therefore, thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua immediately followed the instructions of the cultivation technique and circulated the qi in her meridians. At this time, the cultivation technique followed the person. The moment Zhang Xiaohua's figure left the arena, her figure actually floated up. Immediately, Zhang Xiaohua immediately used her qi to propel her body and used the ethereal steps. Her entire body was like a spinning top, taking advantage of the opportunity to eliminate the force of her body rushing out. She also took the opportunity to change the direction of her body and floated to the inside of the arena, landing on the other side of Tang Shi. At this time, in the eyes of the people below the arena, Zhang Xiaohua's figure did not leave the arena. It was just that her feet used some unknown method to borrow the force of the rotation on the arena to change the direction of the force, causing the crowd to immediately cry out in alarm. By the time Tang Shi turned around, Zhang Xiaohua had already rotated to the air behind Tang Shi. Borrowing the force of the rotation, Zhang Xiaohua kicked towards Tang Shi's shoulder. At this moment, Tang Shi was unguarded and was kicked, resulting in the scene of Tang Shi falling off the arena. When Tang Shi landed, he raised his head and looked at Zhang Xiaohua on the arena in confusion. The half-incense stick below the arena had just finished burning. The leader looked at the fallen Tang Shi and Zhang Xiaohua on the arena, who was not pleasing to the eye. He angrily announced, "Number 250, victory." The disciples below the arena also let out a buzz. It was unknown whether they were praising or insulting, but they all dispersed. Tang Shi's face was also filled with regret. He hung his head and prepared to follow the crowd to another place. "Tang Shi, stop right there." Suddenly, two people called out in unison. When Tang Shi turned around, it was Zhang Xiaohua and the leader below the arena who called out to him at the same time. Puzzled, Tang Shi asked, "Leader, is there anything else?" The leader said, "Tang Shi, don't be in such a hurry to leave. Although you lost this round, it doesn't mean that you can't pass the second round." Tang Shi's face was filled with confusion as he said, "Since I've already lost, what qualifications do I have to pass the second round?" At this time, Zhang Xiaohua on the arena also came down the escalator. She smiled at Tang Shi and said, "Brother Tang, this is the fortune of fools. Even if you lost, you can still pass." Tang Shi was not happy and said, "You're the fool. Although I practice external techniques, my brain is not outside. Don't try to trick me." Zhang Xiaohua giggled and said, "If I lied to you, would the leader also lie to you?" Looking at Tang Shi's childish face, the leader explained, "It's like this. Tang Shi, this number 250 is not a disciple of our Kitty Hawk Hall. He only participated in the written test and did not occupy the quota of our Kitty Hawk Hall. In other words, although you lost, your quota of number 250 cannot be snatched from you. On the other hand, you won. Number 250 cannot pass the second round. Tang Shi suddenly understood and said, "No wonder I felt that you looked unfamiliar. I have never seen you in the Kitty Hawk Hall. So you are not my senior brother." "That's right, this means that in this last round, no matter if I win or lose, I still have to pass." Zhang Xiaohua and the leader nodded and said in unison, "That's right." Tang Shi's face was calm as he said, "Yes, it seems that my character is really not bad." Zhang Xiaohua and the leader both fell to the ground with a bang. Including Zhang Xiaohua, there were a total of 17 people who passed the second round. The disciples of the Kitty Hawk Hall who passed were all grinning from ear to ear. The rewards for the second round were very generous and related to their future in martial arts. How could they not be excited? Of course, if they could challenge the second-rank commoner Cloak Hall tomorrow, there would be even more unimaginable rewards. Therefore, after Steward Su explained to everyone that the third round of challenges would be held in the square in front of the conference hall, everyone dispersed in an uproar. Nonsense, they had already competed in 4 rounds today and were so tired that they were hovering between life and death. Which one of them did not want to hurry back to their residence to rest and recuperate so that they could have better results tomorrow? Only Zhang Xiaohua asked Zhang Xiaohu with a puzzled expression, "Second brother, is it because the dining hall of the Kitty Hawk Hall is too small that these children are fighting to eat there?" Without waiting for Zhang Xiaohu to answer, she nodded her head and said, "It must be so. On one hand, it can increase income and reduce expenditure, and on the other hand, it can train these children's qigong. AI, it really is a good idea." Zhang Xiaohu listened to Zhang Xiaohua muttering to herself and could not help but smile. "Xiaohua, do you want to eat red braised meat again?" Red braised meat? When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she could not help but secretly swallow her saliva and said, "Yes, I haven't eaten it in a while." "Second brother, it's strange if you didn't mention red braised meat, I wouldn't have thought of it. Furthermore, it has been a long time since I liked to eat meat as much as I did before. However, now that you mention it, I really miss that tempting taste." Zhang Xiaohu smiled slightly and said, "It's a pity that this is not the Guizhuang house and I can't make red braised meat for you at any time. If we were at home, perhaps mother would make it for you." Speaking of their parents in the Guizhuang house, the two of them were a little sad. However, Zhang Xiaohu forced a smile and said, "After this martial arts exhibition, let's find a chance to go back and take a look. We've been out for more than a year, it's time to go out and take a look." Zhang Xiaohua also nodded and said, "All right, it's decided then. Oh right, I wonder how Captain he is doing with his ethereal steps. He didn't come to watch me compete today." Zhang Xiaohu patted his shoulder and said, "Then why don't we go and take a look? You also have the pharmacy hall's token now, if we don't use it now, when will we?" Thinking of the pharmacy hall, Zhang Xiaohua smiled and touched the token in her bosom and said, "I also have the same intention. If we don't use the token, it will expire and become invalid. If their hall master takes it back, we won't be able to go even if we want to." After the two brothers finished their discussion, they walked all the way to the pharmacy hall. If the martial arts exhibition was compared to a festival, this lively festival had already come to an end. The Misty School disciples who had enjoyed the festival's hustle and bustle were still excited. They could be seen in groups of 2s and 3s, or in groups, gathering together. Some were whispering, some had excited expressions, and some were competing in a circle. The Misty School didn't forbid the disciples from competing, but this kind of competition had to be carried out in the practice room. Only during the martial arts exhibition was the time when the disciples were allowed to exchange pointers in the open space to deepen their understanding of the competition. Zhang Xiaohua and her brother walked all the way. Whenever they came across a place where people were exchanging pointers, they would stop with interest and stand outside to watch the excitement. Sometimes, when they saw something exciting, they couldn't help but clap and cheer, attracting the attention of others. However, how could Zhang Xiaohua be interested in looking at other people's faces? Fortunately, Zhang Xiaohua was still young, so it was more than enough for her to pretend to be a disciple of fledgling Hall. Presumably, Zhang Xiaohua thought in her heart, you may not remember my face anyway, so I'll leave this disdain and contempt to fledgling Hall. Along the way, the small arenas that were commonly seen a few days ago were also removed. The joys and sorrows left to the disciples on the arenas had become memories. A trace of understanding rose in Zhang Xiaohua's heart. The world was like floating clouds. No matter how noisy it was, no matter how prosperous it was, there would always be a moment when it passed. What was left? How much was left? Even when they approached the pharmacy hall, Zhang Xiaohua was still stuck in that moment of enlightenment. Zhang Xiaohu felt Zhang Xiaohu's abnormality and asked with some worry, Xiaohua, why aren't you saying anything? Are you tired? Why don't we go back to my place to rest? Zhang Xiaohu's ordinary and faint words of concern instantly put an end to Zhang Xiaohua's enlightenment. A warm current rose in Zhang Xiaohua's heart. At the same time, Zhang Xiaohua also felt a kacha sound coming from somewhere in her mind, as if she had broken free from some kind of restraint. Zhang Xiaohua felt a great sense of freedom. Yes, perhaps the world was like clouds and unpredictable, but the worry, concern of those close to you, no matter what kind of environment, whether you cared about it or not, were real. It gave you a safe reliance and accompanied you on the road of life. On this ordinary afternoon, on this ordinary journey, why would Zhang Xiaohu think so much? After he finished asking, Zhang Xiaohua raised her head and said with a faint smile, "Second brother, don't worry. I'm just thinking about some things. I'm not tired. Let's go. Let's hurry into the pharmacy hall. I can't help but want to see Captain He's progress." Zhang Xiaohua was still Zhang Xiaohua, and her smile was still so cute. However, in Zhang Xiaohu's eyes, this younger brother of his was a little different. What exactly was it? He couldn't tell. It seemed like he had grown up and matured a little. Or maybe his aura had changed a little. Gradually, he started to have the feeling of looking up to a tall mountain. Zhang Xiaohu couldn't tell. This was because Zhang Xiaohua was transforming bit by bit, without anyone noticing. There was still a guard at the entrance of the pharmacy hall, but it wasn't the one they saw last time. Zhang Xiaohu took out his waist token and Zhang Xiaohua showed it. The guard carefully checked the token for a long time before letting them in. After the two entered, they didn't know where to find He Tianshu. Should they go to his room or directly to the technique practicing room? Zhang Xiaohua pondered for a moment before saying to Zhang Xiaohu, this ethereal steps was personally bestowed by sect leader O. He clearly said that it can't be taught to anyone privately. I believe Captain he can't openly practice it in the technique practicing room. I reckon he's still practicing alone in his residence. Zhang Xiaohu felt that it made sense. Following his memory, he found He Tianshu's residence. Zhang Xiaohua still understood He Tianshu. With He Tianshu's cautiousness, why would he practice in a crowded place? He would feel uncomfortable hiding in his own residence. Fortunately, he was practicing the ethereal steps. It didn't require much space. If he really wanted to practice the third level of Qigong, the space in this small house wasn't enough for him. When He Tianshu opened the door and saw Zhang Xiaohua, both of them were very surprised. He Tianshu asked, Zhang Xiaohua, why are you still in Ethereal Mountain Manor? The martial arts exhibition is already over. Why don't you hurry back to Huanxi Mountain Manor? The herb fields there still need someone to look after them. When Zhang Xiaohua saw He Tianshu's disheveled appearance and sunken eyes, she was also very surprised. It wasn't that He Tianshu hadn't comprehended the ethereal steps before, but it wasn't to such an extent of obsession. Now, it seemed that the dispirited look on his face wasn't something that could be caused in a day or two. Zhang Xiaohua didn't directly answer He Tianshu's question. Instead, she asked with concern, Captain He, how did you become like this? How did you become so haggard after not seeing you for 2 days? Zhang Xiaohu was also shocked. He said, Captain He, if you aren't feeling well, you still have to go to the medical hall. Don't delay. He Tianshu rubbed the space between his eyebrows and squeezed out a smile. It's nothing. I was just comprehending that footwork. I didn't sleep all night, so I became like this. After I finish comprehending it, I'll be fine after a good rest. However, Zhang Xiaohu didn't let it go and said, Captain He, didn't you also comprehend it a few times before? I didn't see you like this. Could it be that it didn't go well this time? He Tianshu smiled bitterly and said, Come, let's talk inside. After the three of them entered the house, He Tianshu said, This time's comprehension is different from the previous time. Yesterday, I saw you use the ethereal steps. It was different from what I comprehended. It was even different from what was recorded in the secret manual. I thought that since you were able to use it, it must be correct. So, while I was comprehending the secret manual, I forced myself to think according to the footwork you used. But it was just like this that made me exhausted and puzzled. If I were to think according to the footwork you used, not only would I not be able to take a step further and comprehend more things, even the footwork I comprehended would be full of mistakes. He Tianshu licked his chapped lips and continued, But if I were to abandon your train of thought and rely on my own comprehension, I wouldn't be able to take a step further. This makes things difficult for me. Then, he looked at Zhang Xiaohua and said with some embarrassment, Moreover, Zhang Xiaohua, your ethereal steps was imparted to you by me. But I didn't expect you to comprehend more than me. Tell me, isn't this making me angry? So. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she was happy. She had just taught her second brother a lesson and built up his self-confidence. Now, she had to teach a cheap master who was defeated by her own cultivation speed. Sigh, misfortunes never come singly. It seemed like she had to cultivate slowly. If she wasn't careful, she would hurt the self-esteem of a group of people. This was a responsibility that she couldn't bear. Zhang Xiaohua was only a teenager. To be able to persuade her second brother and let him realize his situation was already commendable. How could she have any words to persuade He Tianshu? This really made things difficult for him. After thinking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua asked, Captain He, this ethereal steps is one of the divine skills of your misty school, right? He Tianshu looked at Zhang Xiaohua and said, asking the obvious, that's for sure. Chapter 186. Zhang Xiaohua immediately asked, Then do you think there would be any mistakes in this secret manual? He Tianshu hesitated for a moment before replying, It shouldn't be. Even if there are some mistakes, it wouldn't be as full of mistakes as when you executed it. Zhang Xiaohua clapped her hands and said, That's right. Captain He, if there were any mistakes in the ethereal steps technique, then how did sect leader O and the rest succeed in cultivating it? If it's just a few pieces of paper that recorded it wrongly, the possibility isn't very high. After all, you've also practiced quite a bit. He Tianshu was still puzzled and asked, But why did you execute it differently from this footwork? Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, Captain He, what do you think of my martial arts foundation? He Tianshu laughed and said, What foundation do you have? You have nothing. Zhang Xiaohua immediately asked, Then what about your martial arts foundation compared to mine? He Tianshu gave Zhang Xiaohua a sideways glance and said, What are you trying to say? How can your martial arts foundation be compared to mine? It's like the difference between heaven and earth. Zhang Xiaohua smiled apologetically and said, Don't worry. Since you know that your foundation is better than mine, then you must also know that when I read this secret manual, I was simply blindly reading it. It was only after you taught me the first level that I was able to understand this secret manual. The reason I was able to use it was purely because I figured it out myself. I definitely couldn't completely follow what was recorded in the secret manual. I used it to the extent that I could, and it wasn't a copy of the secret manual at all. You are different from me. The ethereal steps recorded in this secret manual is tailor-made for a Misty School elite like you. If you were to comprehend it according to my wild fox Zen, it would definitely go against what was recorded in the secret manual. How could you succeed in comprehending it? When He Tianshu heard this, his eyes unconsciously lit up as he nodded slightly. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua continued, Captain He, let's talk about it in depth. Did you see that I was able to completely execute the second level of the ethereal steps in the arena and you still have a lot to comprehend? Did you feel uncomfortable in your heart? When He Tianshu heard this, he blushed and shook his head in denial. No, there's no such thing. When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, he couldn't help but think of himself and shake his head. Zhang Xiaohua didn't refute him. She only said, actually, Captain He, although the ancients have a good saying, there's 100 years of learning, and the one who reaches the top is the teacher. But think about how embarrassing it was when I was learning the fist art. You don't have to be so jealous of me just because I have a little bit of achievement in ethereal steps. When He Tianshu heard this, he slapped Zhang Xiaohua's head and said with a smile, little fella, I'm not jealous of you. I just feel that sect leader O asked me to teach you a movement technique, but I haven't learned it yet. I feel that I've let him down. Zhang Xiaohu also spoke up from the side. He said solemnly, Martial Uncle He, I know that if one blindly studies the cultivation of the inner force cultivation technique and goes into a dead end, it's very easy to go berserk. But I wonder if the cultivation of the movement technique is the same? This sentence was like a heavy hammer that smashed into He Tianshu's heart. His expression immediately turned serious as he said, Zhang Xiaohu, you're right. It's not just the inner force cultivation technique, it's the same for the cultivation of other martial arts. The most taboo in martial arts is to walk into a dead end. Not only is it easy to create a bottleneck, it's very easy to go berserk and be unable to extricate oneself. Today, I've really fallen into a vicious circle that I can't walk out of. I really have to thank you for coming to find me. If this continues for a few more days, it might have a very serious impact on me. Zhang Xiaohu and Zhang Xiaohua were stunned. They asked at the same time, it's that serious? He Tianshu smiled bitterly and said, the path of martial arts is incomparably difficult. It's far from what you can imagine. In the future, as you improve, you'll know. Since he put down the burden in his heart, He Tianshu put the secret book away and temporarily stopped thinking about it. He then asked, oh right, Zhang Xiaohua, you still haven't told me. We've been in the Misty Mountain Villa for a long time. You should hurry back and check on the medicine field. Don't make any trouble. Zhang Xiaohua shook her head disapprovingly and said, what trouble can there be? Isn't it just weeding? In this period of time, the grass in the field doesn't seem to be so long. There's no need to clear it like this. He Tianshu was a bit puzzled and said, the grass in the medicine field has always been dense and hard to clear. It's not like you said, it actually doesn't grow. That's good. We can just watch from the side as we plant the herbs. Zhang Xiaohua saw that He Tianshu didn't believe her and said, if Captain He doesn't believe me, you can go take a look now. He Tianshu waved his hand and said with a smile, I'm at ease with you handling things. It wasn't easy to hide in the medicine hall. Why wouldn't I stay for a few more days? Soon after, he seemed to realize something and asked, I'm asking you. Kid, why don't you hurry back and check on the medicine field? Zhang Xiaohua spread her hands and said with a helpless expression, it's not that I don't want to go back. Someone else won't let me go. Who? He Tianshu was angry and said, who has the guts to stop you? Hurry up and tell me. I'll make the decision for you. Zhang Xiaohua smiled slyly and said, I'm afraid you can't afford to offend this person. Can't afford to offend? He Tianshu rolled his eyes and probed, could it be that Boss O asked you to stay? Or maybe Manor Lord O agreed? Pfft, Zhang Xiaohua laughed out loud and said self-deprecatingly, Captain He, who do you think I am? Why would I wander around in front of two big shots when I have nothing to do? He Tianshu was a bit anxious and said, then you should tell me clearly. Who is it that won't let you go back? Zhang Xiaohua couldn't stand it anymore and rebuked, Xiaohua, stop teasing me. Hurry up and tell Martial Uncle he everything clearly. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she laughed and said, let me tell you a piece of good news. I fought 9 battles and drew 9 draws yesterday and entered the second round of the martial arts exhibition. Captain He, you didn't see it yesterday. It's a pity that you didn't get to feast your eyes. When He Tianshu heard this news, he was a bit surprised and said, 9 battles and 9 draws only gave you 9 points. With a mere 9 points, you can enter the second round? Zhang Xiaohua patted her chest and said, it's the real deal. He Tianshu smiled and said, that can only mean that you're lucky. Even if you pass, you'll be last. Moreover, with your cowardly fighting style, there's really nothing to see. What's there for me to feast my eyes on? Zhang Xiaohua said embarrassedly, you really have sharp eyes. My number plate is indeed the last. Hearing this, He Tianshu suddenly came to a realization. He smiled and said, today is the second round of the competition. Zhang Xiaohua, did you get beaten up badly by others today? Then, without waiting for Zhang Xiaohua to reply, he said, the disciples who entered the second round all have the strength of a cotton cloak stage 1. Moreover, the duration of the competition is prolonged. I'm afraid that your fist techniques might not be enough. Most of them are disciples with good inner strength. I'm sure they have their own methods to restrain your strength. Moreover, if you continue to use the ethereal steps, I'm sure the leader will still judge you to lose in the end. No matter how you look at it, you can't escape the word failure. He. Zhang Xiaohua bared her teeth and said unhappily, Captain He, don't tell me you don't think highly of your most beloved disciple. Do you really think that the martial arts you taught me will be ruined by me just like that? He Tianshu also chuckled and said, well, I'm just stating facts. Moreover, the disciples of the Eagle Hall have been practicing martial arts for so many years. You've only been learning for so long. It's normal that you're not their match. However, he immediately saw Zhang Xiaohua's smiling expression. He couldn't help but open his mouth in surprise. He pointed at Zhang Xiaohua and asked, it can't be. Don't tell me you can actually win a round. Zhang Xiaohua shook her head and said narcissistically, it's not just a round. I'm now one of the contestants challenging the third round. When He Tianshu heard this, he hurriedly ran outside. He opened the door and stuck his head out to take a look before turning back. Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu were puzzled and asked, Captain He, what's wrong? Are you afraid that someone will eavesdrop outside? However, He Tianshu said, that's not it. I just want to see where the sun will set today. Zhang Xiaohua said in surprise, that goes without saying. It will definitely set in the west. He Tianshu laughed loudly and said, after hearing your news, I thought that the sun would rise from the west today. Zhang Xiaohua curled her lips and said, is it necessary? Is my martial arts that bad? He Tianshu laughed and said, it's not necessary, it's necessary. I thought that you would be burning incense to be able to win a round, but I didn't expect that you would be able to win all the rounds. Amazing, amazing. Is this the legendary hero from the youth? Quick, tell me how you passed the test. Zhang Xiaohua was annoyed that he laughed at her and refused to say anything. He Tianshu could only look at Zhang Xiaohu for help. Zhang Xiaohu couldn't stand his sad eyes. After a while, he couldn't take it anymore and told him everything that happened in the arena today. When he heard that Zhang Xiaohua used different methods to pass and even had a free pass, He Tianshu yelled that the heavens were unfair. Why didn't he encounter such a good thing in the past? When Zhang Xiaohua asked He Tianshu how he passed the second round in the past, he stammered and refused to say clearly. In the end, he was forced to say it out helplessly. However, he was kicked off the arena in the first round. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but laugh loudly. Although He Tianshu was ridiculing Zhang Xiaohua for being able to pass like this, but after all, she was a disciple that he taught himself. He Tianshu was also happy. Thinking that he still had to challenge the second-level commoner disciple tomorrow, Yi Tianshu carefully explained some details and then urged Zhang Xiaohua to rest early so that she could recover her energy and strength to face tomorrow's healthy battle. Although Zhang Xiaohua didn't have any expectations for tomorrow's challenge, it was still a competition after all. She couldn't not be serious, so she didn't dare to be negligent. She went to the medicine hall's guest room early and closed the door to rest. It was still early at this time. Normally, Zhang Xiaohua would be reading books about medicinal herbs. Although this guest room was the medicine hall's, there weren't any books about medicinal herbs. Zhang Xiaohua wasn't used to it and walked left and right. Suddenly, she thought of the Carefree Heart Sutra in her arms. Ever since this book was taken out from the Misty School's library, she had only familiarized herself with the first level of the cultivation technique. Zhang Xiaohua's original plan was to wait until she had truly mastered the first level. When she started to practice the second level, she would then prepare to read the mental cultivation technique for the second level. Progressing step by step was the way of reading. But looking at He Tianshu's recent struggle, it was because he didn't read the entire Ethereal Steps manual in detail that he made some mistakes when he was comprehending the Ethereal Steps. It was only after Zhang Xiaohua's reminder that he made up for it. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua was prepared to use He Tianshu as a reference and read through the Carefree Heart Sutra once. She memorized the 18 levels of the cultivation technique in the heart of the Heart Sutra. The differences of each level and the things to take note of for each level had to be engraved in her heart. At the very least, if she accidentally lost the Heart Sutra, she wouldn't be afraid that she wouldn't be able to cultivate it. There weren't many records in the Carefree Heart Sutra, but there were a total of 18 levels of the cultivation technique. This time, Zhang Xiaohua was determined to carefully engrave it in her heart, unlike the previous time when she had just swallowed it. Therefore, she didn't read much even in the dead of the night. This was also because Zhang Xiaohua's mind was now smart and she had a photographic memory. Otherwise, she would have long been dizzy and drowsy. When a spark burst out from the lamp, Zhang Xiaohua blinked her somewhat shaky eyes and closed the manual. She closed her eyes and carefully recalled what she had just learned. Only when she confirmed that she had completely memorized it, did she return to the Kong bed and sit cross-legged to regulate her breathing. Not long later, the yuan qi of heaven and earth dispersed from the medicinal hall drew Zhang Xiaohua over. It slowly entered her body and began to refine her body. The starlight in the night sky also arrived as scheduled. The next morning, Zhang Xiaohua woke up early as usual and practiced the Big Dipper magical fist in the courtyard. When the first circulation appeared to refine her bones, Zhang Xiaohu also woke up. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua dancing at the sound of the rooster, Zhang Xiaohu naturally couldn't be negligent and also practiced his beloved Six Harmonies fist technique. On the other hand, He Tianshu seemed to have untied the knot in his heart yesterday. He slept soundly last night and didn't wake up until the sun rose. Seeing that both Zhang Xiaohua and her brother were practicing martial arts, he smiled embarrassedly and said, "You guys are quite diligent. You guys continue with your practice. I'll go into the hall to see if there's anything else." Hearing that, Zhang Xiaohua stopped and asked curiously, "Team leader He, today is the day of the third round of the martial arts exhibition. Aren't you going to participate?" He Tianshu slapped his forehead and said, "I forgot about this. I've never been able to pass the third trial before, so I didn't keep it in mind. If you didn't remind me, I would have forgotten about it." "That, Zhang Xiaohua, this third round is your mission today. I don't need it. Our medicinal hall's main purpose is to cultivate medicinal herbs and refine elixirs. Although martial arts is important, it's not the first choice. We have less time to cultivate compared to others in the sect. If we compete with others, we will definitely be at a disadvantage. Therefore, in the martial arts exhibition, our medicinal hall's selection and competition are different from others. I already advanced 2 levels a few days ago, so I don't need to pass the third round today. However, I advanced this year and have the qualifications to go to the main hall to watch the competition. Pack up, I'll go with you guys." Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously, so you're saying that not all disciples can come to the main hall square to watch the competition? He Tianshu nodded and said, yes. Our Misty School has many disciples, so how big can the square be? Naturally, only a portion of the disciples who are qualified can watch the competition. Nie Xiao and the others can't go. Zhang Xiaohua was very happy when she heard that. If they didn't go, then there would be fewer people to watch her fail miserably. Zhang Xiaohu also thought about it and asked casually, Marshal Uncle He, other than the medicinal hall, which other disciples are like you and don't need to pass the third round? He Tianshu said without hesitation, at least there's Mingsue Hall. They are female disciples, so their strength and inner strength are different from us male disciples. If they compete on the same stage, they are weaker. Therefore, the competition in this martial arts exhibition is different from ours. Actually, this martial arts exhibition is mainly prepared for common-clothed low-level disciples. They have the most people and it's easier for them to advance. They usually advance one level per year, so they are happy to participate. As for the high-level disciples, sometimes they may not even advance one level in 2 or 3 years. Zhang Xiaohua nodded. Zhang Xiaohua asked again, then the people who are going to pass the third round today are all common-clothed low-level disciples, right? He Tianshu thought for a moment and said, that might not be the case. It's different every year. Maybe there are many high-level disciples who are challenging above their level this year. Zhang Xiaohua's face was full of anticipation and said, I really want to see the high-level disciples compete. I wonder what their competition is like. He Tianshu smiled and said, won't we know when we see it? When Zhang Xiaohua and the other two arrived at the square in front of the assembly hall, the sun was already high up in the sky. The square in front of the assembly hall wasn't very big, so there weren't many arenas built. There were only 6 arenas. Near the entrance of the assembly hall was a slightly bigger arena. The other 5 arenas were like stars surrounding the moon, surrounded in a semicircle. These 6 arenas were more than twice as big as the one in Kitty Eagle Hall, and were about half the height of a person. There were many people in the square, but it wasn't as many as Zhang Xiaohua imagined. Moreover, there weren't any guards standing guard to check the disciples' identity or qualification. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but turn around and ask He Tianshu, Captain He, this square isn't big. If all the unqualified disciples come to watch, won't it be too big? Won't anyone care? He Tianshu snorted at Zhang Xiaohua's question and said, do you think that the disciples of our Misty School are like you, unorganized and undisciplined? Our sect's rules are very strict. The rule of the martial arts exhibition is that disciples who are qualified to watch can come to the square to watch. Those who aren't qualified to watch, of course, won't come. Zhang Xiaohua nodded embarrassedly. She really felt that she had asked a stupid question. Zhang Xiaohu heard this and smiled, asking, Marshal Uncle He, I also have a question, but I don't know if I should say it. He Tianshu turned his head and said, if you have something to say, then say it. You're a direct disciple, so you naturally have the qualifications to watch. You probably don't know this, so I'll tell you now. Zhang Xiaohu shook his head and said, I'm not asking about this, but a very practical question. He Tianshu said curiously, then tell me, what is the practical question? Chapter 187. Zhang Xiaohu pointed at the stage that was as tall as 2 people and said with a smile, such a tall stage, I don't know how Xiaohua can get up there. Zhang Xiaohua slapped the back of her head and almost cried out, oh, I forgot that the escalator is over at Kitty Hawk Hall. It must have been put away a long time ago and won't be easy to find. What should I do? He Tianshu helplessly looked at Zhang Xiaohua and complained, Zhang Xiaohua, can't you hurry up and learn that reckless bull force? Hurry up and learn a qinggong. Do you know that you're making me lose face by doing this every day? After he finished speaking, he said, you guys wait a moment, and ran out. Zhang Xiaohua looked at He Tianshu's back and laughed, saying to herself, I don't even think it's embarrassing and you're afraid of losing face. Not long after, He Tianshu was seen carrying an escalator and came back under the strange gazes of the disciples. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua and her brother, He Tianshu angrily threw the escalator to Zhang Xiaohu and said, I knew that you guys wouldn't bring me here so early in the morning for anything good. Zhang Xiaohu caught the escalator and was about to say something when he heard the sound of a bell. The entire square immediately quieted down. Zhang Xiaohua looked around in surprise, not knowing what had happened. He Tianshu quickly patted Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder and said in a low voice, the third stage is about to begin. Pay attention and don't talk. Just watch carefully. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua immediately raised her head and looked at the largest stage in front of her, but there was still no one there. Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled when she saw a group of people walk out from the meeting hall behind the stage. At the front was the Misty School's leader, O Peng. Zhang Xiaohua recognized some of the people behind him and some she hadn't seen before. They were all high-ranking members of the Misty School. Zhang Xiaohua thought that they would go to the stage, but they went up the stairs and walked to a stage made of reed mats. There were many tables and chairs under the reed mats. Zhang Xiaohua held her forehead and laughed secretly. The stage was where the competition was held. What was the leader doing there? When O Peng and the others sat down under the reed mats, they saw a young disciple jump onto the stage. It was the Misty School's first disciple, Zhang Qingyue. When Zhang Qingyue arrived on the stage, he looked around and looked at the people in the square and said loudly, the third stage of the martial arts exhibition begins now. Zhang Qingyue's voice wasn't loud, but it echoed throughout the square. It was as if he was speaking beside everyone's ears. Zhang Xiaohua was envious. She looked at He Tianshu from the corner of her eyes and thought, as expected of the first disciple. His inner strength isn't just a little bit higher than He Tianshu's. Actually, Zhang Xiaohua's martial arts had already entered the alley and could tell the level of Zhang Qingyue and He Tianshu's martial arts based on her intuition. However, if the two of them didn't really fight, how could she tell who was stronger and who wasn't? What she relied on was the jealous look in He Tianshu's eyes. Today was the third stage of the martial arts exhibition. It was also the essence of the martial arts exhibition. It was the most lively moment. All the disciples who had won in the previous stages had to show their skills today. Moreover, only today would sect leader O personally come to the stage. Even if sect leader O's vision was high, the people in the reed mats were all elders of the sect. If her performance was recognized by those people, wouldn't her future in the Misty School be bright? Not to mention the disciples below the stage who were eager to fight. Zhang Qingyue on the stage took out a piece of paper and said with a smile, first of all, congratulations to the 17 disciples who won in the first stage of the fledgling hall's common cloth-clothed rank 1 disciples for successfully passing the appraisal of common cloth-clothed rank 1. Today, they will be challenging common cloth-clothed rank 2 disciples. I hope they will have a result that will excite us. In advance, we have already selected 17 disciples from common cloth-clothed rank 2 disciples. They will be in stage 1 to stage 5. Go to the various stages according to the order in which I read out the number plates and prepare for today's competition. After he finished speaking, Zhang Qingyue raised the paper in his hand and read, number 1, number 5, number 12, and number 31 will be in stage 1. Number 2, number 6, number 28, and number 33 will be in stage 2. Number 3, number 8, and number 49 will be in stage 3. Number 57, and number 59. When he read to this point, he paused and frowned slightly. He seemed to be hesitating, but he still continued to read, and number 250 will be in stage 5. As soon as Zhang Qingyue's voice fell, there was a hubbub in the square. The disciples in the square were all common cloth-clothed rank 1 disciples. They had participated in the third stage of the martial arts exhibition more than once or twice. Many of the older disciples had participated in more than 10 sessions. They naturally knew that the contestants in the third stage were all common cloth-clothed rank 1 elites. Moreover, The number plates were given out according to the results of the first stage. There had never been more than 100 disciples who entered the third stage. Even those who were less than 50 were extremely rare. But now, when they heard Zhang Qingyue read out number 250, those who had a slight idea of the number of young Eagle Hall disciples this year would know that number 250 was probably the last person to pass the first stage. For such a disciple to be able to enter the third stage, this was probably an almost impossible matter. Therefore, everyone inevitably began to discuss. When Zhang Qingyue saw the reaction of the disciples, his frown deepened. He looked at the paper in his hand again and confirmed that he had not read it wrong. Only then did he lightly snort. That snort resounded throughout the square like thunder in everyone's ears. The entire square immediately quieted down. Zhang Qingyue continued, "The rules of the challenge competition are the same as before. After the time it takes for 3 incense sticks to burn, if it's a draw, the challenger wins. The list of common cloth-clothed rank 1 will end here. The list of the other ranks will be announced after the common cloth-clothed rank 1 competition is over. Next, contestants, please come to the stage." After he finished speaking, Zhang Qingyue floated down the stage and walked towards the reed mat shelter. Following that, 5 older disciples also gracefully leaped onto the stage. They were presumably the common cloth-clothed rank 2 disciples waiting to challenge them. Originally, stage 1 was reserved for the most outstanding disciple of the second stage. The competition on this stage was always the most exciting. Usually, it was packed with people. But now, many disciples were rushing towards stage 5, wanting to see the true face of contestant number 250. Today, stage 1 was empty. Seeing all the disciples walking towards stage 5, how could Zhang Xiaohua not know their intentions? This fellow did not have any thoughts of success. He just curled his lips. It's not like they were watching a monkey show. Why were they so curious? However, after listening to the rules of the challenge, Zhang Xiaohua still had a plan in his heart. Nonsense, the result of 9 matches being a draw in the first stage. No matter what, he should have some experience in fighting a draw. If this third stage, he still used the guerrilla tactics of Big Dipper magical fist and ethereal steps, this draw would not be 90% certain. Thinking that he would be able to pass the third stage, Zhang Xiaohua could not help but smile. The farce in this world was really not a small number. He Tianshu and Zhang Xiaohu also looked at each other and smiled. They were also confident in Zhang Xiaohua's chances of a draw. Zhang Xiaohua and the other 2's footsteps were still a little slow. When they wanted to move, the 5 stages in the square had already been surrounded by many people. Moreover, there were already 5 commoner first stage disciples floating up. To say that this Misty school was really worthy of the name Misty. Every disciple's qing gong was powerful. Not only the 2 disciples competing on the stage, but the disciples below the stage had already occupied an advantageous position. Zhang Xiaohua and the rest could only tiptoe and gather at the back. At this time, the 5 pairs of disciples on the stage had already started fighting. Although the 5 new commoner first stage disciples had just advanced, they were after all powerful figures. These 5 commoner second stage disciples were specially selected by Zhang Qingyue and the rest. They were not the top disciples and only represented the average strength of the commoner second stage disciples. Therefore, other than the disciple number 57 on the 5th stage who was gradually losing the upper hand, the other 4 stages were still in a situation where they were evenly matched. Looking at the stage, the disciples who had passed with him were fighting with their real swords and spears. There were no tricks used. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but think of 2 words from the bottom of his heart, fierce. At the same time, Zhang Xiaohua looked at the 5th stage on the left. Although there was no suspense in the battle on the stage, he was still unwilling to leave. There were many disciples who were looking forward to the 3rd battle. In his heart, he was also hesitant about whether or not he should use guerrilla tactics on the stage. If it was about his true strength, he was most likely inferior to this commoner second stage disciple. After all, his internal strength was more than a year more than a first-stage disciple. The application of skills was also many times more. At most, he could last for 2 incense sticks of time. Any longer and he would be exhausted. It was difficult to guarantee that he would not be kicked off the stage. But if he used the ethereal steps, he could only blindly move around. When the time came, although he could win with a draw, the difference in the martial arts of the competition was not just a little bit. Even compared to the commoner first-stage disciple who was at a disadvantage on the stage, he was still inferior. Presumably, he would be sneered at by the disciples below the stage. If that was the case, he would not want to enter the Misty Mountain Villa in the future. To fight or not to fight, to lose or to draw, these were all questions. The time for 3 incense sticks of time was quickly up. Except for the 5th stage, where the commoner first-stage disciple failed, the other 4 stages all won or drew and directly obtained the qualification of the commoner second-stage disciple. Not to mention the disciples below the stage who were discussing with each other, even the higher-ups under the reed mat shelter were pointing at the few disciples on the stage and whispering to each other. The reed mat shelter was right in front of the assembly hall's door. It was beside the stairs and was 1 head higher than the stage. It was just right to see all the battles on the 5 stages clearly. When O Peng, Shui Yupeng, Aunt Qin, and the others saw that the young disciples were so energetic and had good results, they were all full of smiles and nodded their heads frequently. The other members of the Misty Six Tigers, as well as the Hall Master of the Divine Machine Hall, would occasionally lower their heads and say something to the disciples below. They must have taken a fancy to the aptitude of these young disciples and wanted to recruit them into the hall. After the first round of challenges ended, the second round began. The situation in the 5 arenas was basically the same as the previous round. Except for the 5th arena, the other challengers were all at an advantage. Thinking about it, the challengers were all ranked at the top. If they couldn't win, then it wouldn't make any sense. Perhaps there would be some suspense for the challengers at the bottom. While everyone was thinking, the time for 3 incense sticks of time was up. It was still the 5th stage's challenger, number 59, who lost. At this time, the disciples in front of the 5th arena gradually lost their curiosity. Contestant number 50 had already been defeated. Contestant number 250, even if he was strong, probably couldn't beat contestant number 50. Even if he was lucky enough to enter the 3rd stage, if he couldn't provide any surprises, what was the point of looking at him? However, since they had already missed the exciting battles on the other stages, there was still 1 more battle on the 5th stage. Everyone would make do and watch to see what kind of superhuman number 250. On the 5th stage, the 2nd stage disciples who were waiting to challenge had already jumped onto the stage. Number 250. Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu, who had a ladder on his back, were squeezing through the crowd and overcoming all difficulties to get onto the stage. At this time, a disciple flew into the reed mat shelter and walked to Zhang Qingyue. He lowered his head and said something. Zhang Qingyue's face changed greatly. With a gloomy face, he waved his hand and let the disciple go. He thought for a moment, then quickly walked to O Peng's side and whispered a few words in his ear. O Peng did the same. His face darkened for a moment, then returned to normal. He frowned deeply and then said a few words to Zhang Qingyue. Zhang Qingyue nodded and quickly walked out of the reed mat shelter. He jumped onto the 1st stage and said loudly, "Disciples, our Misty School has guests from afar. Let's end the martial arts exhibition here. After we send off the guests, let's continue the competition." Of the 5 stages, other than Zhang Xiaohua, the other 4 had just jumped onto the stage and could only jump back down. Zhang Xiaohua was squeezing her way forward. She stopped and smiled at Zhang Xiaohu and said, "Second brother, let's go back. It's a good thing you said it early. If you waited until I was halfway up, wouldn't it waste my energy?" At this moment, Zhang Qingyue waved his hand towards a certain direction and made a gesture. 9 consecutive bell tolls could be heard. It was the bell used by the ethereal sect to welcome their guests. The disciples in the square were also well trained. They stood by the side obediently, leaving a path from the meeting hall to the outside. Inside the reed mat shelter, Peng heard the sound of the bell. He stood up, looked around, and walked out first. The others followed him and walked out of the square along the path left by the disciples. Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu had never been in such a situation before. They didn't know where to put their hands and feet. Luckily, He Tianshu had been following behind them. He reached out and pulled them to stand in the middle of the group of disciples. They weren't tall and their positions weren't in the middle. Naturally, they didn't stand out and no one could see anything wrong with them. When Peng and the others left the square, the disciples were still standing with their arms folded. They didn't show any signs of leaving. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Captain He, what's going on?" He Tianshu looked around and whispered in her ear, "I think people from the other sects in Jianghu came to visit. 9 bell tolls is an extremely high standard. I think it's people from the large sects like the Dalan Temple, Fragrance Sect, or the Righteous Alliance. Maybe it's the leader of Wan Jianfeng or the other sections." Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously, "Could it be their leader?" He Tianshu shook his head and said, "I don't think so. If their leader came, the bell wouldn't just be 9 tolls, but 18. This is our Misty School's highest standard for welcoming guests." Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously, "How is the standard for welcoming guests related to the sound of the bell?" He Tianshu smiled bitterly and said, "This rule has been passed down since a long time ago. I don't know the specific meaning behind it. I only know that if a top figure of a top sect is to ring the bell 18 times, the highest standard is 9 times. A top figure of a sect that is on par with our ethereal sect is to ring the bell 6 times or 3 times. A normal sect is to ring the bell 6 times or 3 times. If the leader of a sect comes, the bell tolls won't be used." Zhang Xiaohua nodded and seemed to understand. In short, the bell tolls are used to differentiate the status of the guests and show respect. "But why isn't it 10 or 20? He Tianshu said, "Didn't I tell you? This is a rule passed down from a long time ago. As for why it's 9 tolls and not 10, I don't know either. Besides..." At this point, He Tianshu paused for a moment. He looked a little hesitant as he said, "During the martial arts exhibition, our Misty sect will not receive any visitors. This is a rule that everyone in the Jianghu knows. But why did a distinguished guest come to visit us today? Is there some other meaning behind this?" Zhang Xiaohua said in surprise, "Really, Captain He, no one has ever come before?" He Tianshu nodded and said, "That's right. In my memory, no one has ever come to visit. I also read in some sect books that a long time ago, there were some arrogant people in Jianghu who wanted to use the Misty School as a springboard to show off in the martial arts exhibition to attract the attention of the people in Jianghu. During the martial arts exhibition, they came to visit our Misty School. However, before they could enter the Misty Mountain Villa, they were beaten until they pissed their pants and went straight back. How could they enter the mountain gate?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Maybe the leaders of other sects came on a whim and came to watch the competition." He Tianshu still shook his head and said, "The Misty School's martial arts exhibition is an internal competition. It's a competition to show the strength of the sect. How could we let other sects see such a secret? Moreover, our Misty School's rule of not receiving guests during the martial arts exhibition is well known in Jianghu. The leaders of other sects wouldn't do such a foolish thing." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohu, who was at the side, interrupted, "Since 9 bell chimes have been released, and sect leader O has personally gone out to welcome him, he must be an extremely important person in the Jianghu. Such a person would not interfere with our martial arts exhibition for no reason. I think there must be something going on inside." He Tianshu also nodded in agreement. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the empty road and said, "Forget it. As the ancients said, if it's a blessing, it's not a curse. If it's a curse, it can't be avoided. What's going to come will come. Let's wait for them to come. Let's wait and see." Post in the comments section and give 15 points as a reward. Hehe, I don't know how to give more. Chapter 188. After a long time, Zhang Xiaohua was getting impatient. But when he looked around, the Misty School disciples didn't have any other expressions on their faces. They just stood there respectfully, occasionally glancing at the end of the aisle. Zhang Xiaohua immediately felt deep respect for the disciples around him. It was a great compliment to the Misty School in his heart. What was this? This was the result of the Misty School's daily education. Even without the presence of the higher-ups, they were still extremely well-behaved. Zhang Xiaohua was ashamed of his inferiority. Just as Zhang Xiaohua's imagination was running wild, he saw that the disciples' eyes were focused on the aisle. Zhang Xiaohua also quickly looked in that direction. Unfortunately, Zhang Xiaohua's height was still too short. Many disciples blocked his view. It wasn't until the guests came closer that he could clearly see who had come to visit during the Misty School's martial arts practice. The person walking in front of the crowd wasn't the Misty School's respected sect leader but an old monk with gray hair and beard. Oh, there was a mistake. His beard and eyebrows were gray. Next to him was Peng, who had a smiling face. Although the old monk was old, he still looked hale and hearty. His back was very straight, and his eyes were squinted. When he looked around, there was a flash of light. From time to time, he would look at the disciples in the square. His expression was very arrogant, and he didn't have the inherent benevolence of a monk. Peng whispered something to the old monk. The old monk nodded slightly, but didn't reply. Behind Peng was the Misty School's deputy sect leader Shui Yupeng. Zhang Xiaohua didn't recognize her, but Zhang Xiaohua keenly noticed that Shui Yupeng's expression was a little awkward, a little angry, and a little helpless. Beside Shui Yupeng were the 6 Misty Tigers and other elders. Behind them were the Misty School's hall masters and a group of bald monks of different ages. The slightly older monks put their palms together and said something to the people accompanying them. The younger ones were even younger than Zhang Xiaohua. Although their palms were also put together, their eyes were darting around, curiously looking at the Misty School's square. When the group of people walked past, Zhang Xiaohua elbowed He Tianshu and asked softly, "Leader He, where do you think these monks came from? What are they doing at the Misty School?" He Tianshu lowered his voice and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, lower your voice. Their internal energy is profound. Be careful not to be heard." Zhang Xiaohua closed her mouth and nodded quickly. He Tianshu said, "The old monk in front is the Dalan Temple's law-enforcing elder Chang Geng. He's a well-known figure in Jianghu. I heard that his martial arts are profound, and he doesn't hold back when he fights. He's also a vengeful person. Not only is everyone in the Dalan Temple afraid of him, but even in Jianghu, he's terrifying. This time, he actually brought a group of monks to our Misty School. It seems like he's holding a grudge." "Ah. I see." Zhang Xiaohua seemed to have understood something as he said, "They are vengeful. Captain He, I believe your ethereal sect must have offended them. That's why they came to visit during the martial arts exhibition." He Tianshu shook his head and said, "I don't know about that. I'm just a small leader in the pharmacy hall. I only care about my own herbs. How could I care about such important matters?" Zhang Xiaohua and the others were making wild guesses in the square. Peng accompanied Chang Geng to the reed mat shelter. Peng invited Chang Geng to take a seat. Chang Geng opened his eyes and looked at him. He said, "Chief you don't have to be so polite. This is your Misty School. Naturally, I can't sit here. Please take a seat." Peng was humble again and said with a smile, "Elder Chang Geng is a senior in the martial arts world. I've admired you for a long time. Counting from my master, you're also my senior. It's only right for you to sit here. Please don't be so polite." Chang Geng waved his hand and said, "I'm just an outsider. There's no need to treat me with such etiquette. Moreover, seniority in the martial arts world is very messy. Chief O, you don't have to mind. Chief O's status in the sect is much higher than mine. It's more suitable for Chief O to sit here. O Peng hurriedly said that he did not dare and declined several times. However, Monk Changgung was adamant about not taking a seat. After a few rounds, O Peng could no longer decline and had no choice but to take a seat. Monk Changgung took the seat of honor. The other older monks also took a seat. The other monks stood behind them in order. After the Dalan Temple's monks sat down, the Misty School's people sat down in order. However, when Wenhai, Lu Mingyue, Xue Qing, and the other disciples stood behind them. After everyone sat down, a disciple served them fragrant tea. O Peng smiled and said, "Elder, please have some tea. This fragrant tea is made from the tea tree unique to our sect's Misty Peak. Please have a taste." Changgung didn't stand on ceremony. He tasted 2 mouthfuls and said, "It's not bad. Although it can't be compared to the Buddhist tea of our Dalan temple, it can still leave a fragrance in the mouth. It's quite good." These words sounded very disrespectful, but the Misty School's people in the shed didn't say anything. It wasn't clear if they were too angry to say anything, or if they were touched by his words. Shui Yupeng looked at the tepid crowd and said, "I've heard that the Dalan temple's people are all eminent monks who have achieved the Tao. The world is empty. Why are you so greedy for food?" Changgung gave Shui Yupeng a sideways glance and asked in a low voice, "May I know who this is?" O Peng hurriedly introduced, "This is Shui Yupeng from our Misty School. She's the deputy chief." When Monk Changgung heard this, he seemed to have already understood. An imperceptible smile appeared at the corner of his mouth as he said, "An eminent monk who has attained the Tao naturally does not desire good food. I have never flaunted myself as someone who has attained the Tao." Shui Yupeng's heart skipped a beat when she heard the ambiguous words. She lowered her eyebrows and didn't say anything. O Peng also knew that things were not going well. He smiled apologetically and said, "Great Master Changgung, you've never been to our sect before. Would you like to stay for a few more days so that we can do our best as hosts?" Changgung still said in the same tone, "That's not necessary. I'm here to admire the grandeur of your sect's martial arts exhibition. I'm also here to exchange martial arts with your sect. You and I are both big sects in Jianghu. Exchanges can also promote the development of martial arts and strengthen the friendship between the two sections. Don't you think so, Chief O?" O Peng thought, "Oh no, he's really here to cause trouble." However, he didn't dare to show any change in his expression. He only said, "The Dalan Temple's position in Jianghu is something that our Misty School can't compare to. It's better to learn from the Dalan Temple. I don't dare to say anything about this exchange." Changgung waved his hand and said, "We're all from the martial arts world, so we know each other's background. Chief O, you don't have to be so polite. This time, I've only brought a few good-for-nothing monks to exchange pointers with your sect's plain-clothed disciples. They're not worthy of your attention." O Peng was stunned. He asked, "What do you mean?" Changgung explained, "The Dalan Temple and the Misty School are both sects with inheritances. We've known each other for thousands of years, so there's no need for us to fight to the death. Moreover, with our skills, if we want to exchange pointers, there's no need to be so calculative in this martial arts exhibition. I heard that your sect's martial arts exhibition is an advancement competition, so I brought a group of disciples of similar age to join in the fun. Let the younger disciples compete with each other while you and I watch from the side. Isn't that great?" O Peng came to a realization. The Dalan Temple's action was probably to test the strength of the ethereal sect's low-ranking disciples. Winning or losing this competition was inappropriate. If he won, he would gain face and boost the strength of his sect's disciples, but it would also attract the attention of the Dalan Temple. However, if he lost, he would be slapping his own face. Others had come to his doorstep to bully him. If news of this spread to the pugilistic world, the ethereal sect's reputation would be ruined. But now, Chang Gung had come in such a hurry that he was caught off guard. He didn't have enough time to prepare. Fortunately, they had only just started the plain-clothed disciples challenge. The other stages hadn't started yet, so he had to deal with them first. Peng winked at Zhang Qingyue and said to Chang Gung, "Master, you've come at a bad time. The plain-clothed disciples challenge is coming to an end. Now, there's only one competition in each arena. How do you plan to participate?" Chang Gung squeezed out a smile and said, "It's fine as long as there's a competition. I've brought a few young children to test their skills in the arena. It's also a way to improve their relationship with your sect's disciples." Peng saw that Chang Gung was insistent on the competition and felt helpless. He probed, "Master, what are the rules for this competition?" Chang Gung flicked his sleeves and said, "Since it's a competition, there can't be any injuries. If there's a mistake, it'll be considered a failure and you'll be punished severely. There's no time limit for this competition. Only a victory or defeat can arouse the desire to win. Chief O, what do you think?" Peng smiled bitterly and said, "Master, you're right. Friendship comes first, competition comes second. Of course, there can't be any injuries. However, what I mean is, on my arena, there are plain-clothed disciples challenge and plain-clothed disciples challenge. How will your sect's disciples participate?" "Oh, I see." Chang Gung thought for a moment and said, "That's easy. Let the plain-clothed disciples compete with our disciples. If our disciples are lucky enough to win, it'll be considered that your sect's plain-clothed disciples have failed the challenge. If your sect's plain-clothed disciples win, it'll be considered that your sect's disciples have passed the challenge. What do you think?" When Peng heard this, he felt indignant. Where did this come from? You've already said that Shi brought a low-level disciple here, which is the standard of our plain-clothed disciples. Now, you want to replace our plain-clothed disciples to test the standard of our plain-clothed disciples. If our plain-clothed disciples win, it'll be considered a success. What kind of success is your success? But if our plain-clothed disciples lose, it'll be good. Our plain-clothed disciples are no match for the Dalan Temple's low-level disciples. Regardless of whether the Dalan Temple's monks win or lose, our Misty School's disciples won't be at an advantage." Although Peng was cursing in his heart, he still had a smile on his face. Although his martial arts had improved greatly and he was confident that he could fight against this famous monk, it would have a huge impact on the Misty School. For the time being, the Misty School didn't have the strength to fight against a super sect like the Dalan Temple. What they needed to do now was to not attract their attention and develop rapidly. Only when their strength reached a certain level would they reveal their ferocious side. If they were to fall out with Monk Chang Gung now, the ethereal sect would be facing an unprecedented calamity if their trump card was exposed. Thinking of this, Peng asked again, "Then what are the rules for the other disciples' matches?" Chang Gung chuckled and said, "Let's see how the younger generation matches up first." "How about that?" Peng nodded and said, "I'll follow the master's instructions." Then, he instructed Zhang Qingyue, according to the master's instructions, go and make the arrangements. After Zhang Qingyue saluted, he said to the group of young monks behind him, "Disciples who want to participate in our sect's level 1 cotton robe challenge, please follow me." As soon as he finished speaking, 3 young monks walked out from the group of young monks. They looked to be around 10 years old, which was the same age as the Misty School's disciples. Looking at the situation, Chang Gung must have already made arrangements. Zhang Qingyue couldn't help but think, it seems like this bald donkey came prepared. The remaining disciples of the Misty School are going to make a fool of themselves. Although the rules had been set that there couldn't be any casualties, the possibility of an accident happening in the match was too high. If there was a mistake, it would only be considered a failure and they would be severely punished. What kind of punishment was this severe punishment? It didn't seem like it was explicitly stated just now. Even if there weren't any casualties, as long as you were thrown off the arena in a sorry state, not only the disciples themselves, but even the Misty School's reputation would be lost. Zhang Qingyue led the 3 young monks to the front of the arena and said, "Young masters, there are 5 arenas. There are 5 matches for the Misty School's disciples. You can choose any one of them." After saying that, he floated onto the arena and used his inner strength to explain the rules of the match to the disciples in the square. If it were any other day, Zhang Qingyue's words would definitely cause a commotion. However, there were outsiders present now. It was obvious that they were here to cause trouble. The disciples already had a common hatred, so why would they break the rules? Seeing that the disciples weren't as noisy as he expected, Zhang Qingyue nodded and said, "Let's invite the disciples of the 5 arenas who are ready to challenge the Misty School's disciples to come up." After saying that, 3 bald monks jumped up from the arena and somersaulted a few times before landing on arenas number 1, number 4, and number 5. Seeing that the 3 monks were standing still, the disciples of number 2 and number 3 also floated onto the arena. When these people stood on the arena, 4 figures flew out from the crowd and landed on arenas number 1 to number 4. These 4 figures seemed to be showing off their lightness skills, but also seemed to be deliberately provoking them. Their figures flew high and fluttered, causing a burst of cheers from below the arena. In fact, if these 4 disciples' lightness skills were good, it might not be so. It was just that they looked better than the bald monks on the arena, so naturally they would be cheered. Moreover, the Misty School was known for its lightness skills. It was better than the Dalan Temple, so it could be considered as taking the lead and suppressing the monks in terms of momentum. Zhang Qingyue stood on the first arena and smiled at the disciple in front of him. The disciple had a simple and honest face, thick limbs, and a small face, but was almost as tall as him. He asked, "Number 12, what's your name?" Number 12 replied in a muffled voice, "I'm young Eagle Cousin's disciple, Tang Shi." When Zhang Qingyue heard this, he nodded and said, "Good, Tang Shi, I'll remember your name. Are you ready?" Tang Shi nodded. Zhang Qingyue said in a clear voice, "Good, let the competition begin." After saying that, he was about to float down when he heard a voice from the side, wait, I haven't gone up yet. Wait a moment." The disciples on arenas number 1 to 4 were already prepared. When Zhang Qingyue gave the order, the 4 pairs of disciples had already started competing. How could they have the leisure to listen to the sounds from the other arenas? Only Zhang Qingyue looked at the 5th arena to the side in puzzlement. Of course, on that arena, there was a monk wearing a white monk robe standing alone. He was puzzled with his palms together and muttering something under his breath as he looked down the arena. Zhang Qingyue looked down the arena again, at the place where the voice came from, and couldn't help but be even more surprised. Weren't the 2 brothers Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu running over from the crowd? Zhang Xiaohu was carrying something like a ladder on his back. Zhang Xiaohua was running in front and had already reached the bottom of the arena. Then, under the watchful eyes of all the disciples, Zhang Xiaohu put the ladder on the side of the arena. Zhang Xiaohua used both hands and feet to nimbly and lightly climb up the arena. Zhang Qingyue, who was standing at the edge of the first arena, was dumbfounded. He didn't know what this meant. He used his qinggong to jump onto the 5th arena, frowned and scolded, "Zhang Xiaohua, what are you doing here? This is the challenge of the martial arts exhibition." Before Zhang Qingyue finished speaking, he seemed to have thought of something and asked in disbelief, "Could it be that you are the legendary number 250? Zhang Xiaohua touched the back of her head and said embarrassedly, "That's me, I am contestant number 250. Zhang Qingyue was a little puzzled and asked, "Why didn't you stay at Huanxi Mountain Manor? Why did you come to the martial arts exhibition?" But, just as he asked, he immediately said, "Forget it, now isn't the time to talk about the reason. You've heard what I said just now, right? Now your opponent has changed to this young master from the Dalan Temple. If you can defeat him, then even if the challenge is successful, although you won't be able to truly become a commoner second-ranked disciple of my Misty School, but with the sect leader, I reckon you won't be lacking in benefits. Are you confident?" When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she immediately puffed out her small chest and said, I'm not confident. Zhang Qingyue smiled and said, good, as expected of. But before he finished speaking, he suddenly understood and hurriedly changed his words. What? You're actually not confident? Zhang Xiaohua said in shame, if it's a draw, then I have some confidence. But if I win, it's really hard to say. When Zhang Qingyue heard this, he thought to himself, this is the truth. He's only been practicing martial arts for a few years, even younger than a commoner first-rank disciple. How can he be a match for these carefully selected disciples of the Dalan Temple? Immediately, he patted his shoulder and said, no matter, we can compete in style and skill. Finished speaking, he jumped off the arena and walked towards the reed mat shelter. Everyone's comments have been added. Thank you for your participation. Also, for these few chapters, I need to fill a hole. Which one do you think it will be? Please feel free to comment. It's still the same old rules. To be honest, I don't know about other rewards. Hehe. Please bookmark. Thank you. Chapter 189. After Zhang Qingyue walked away, Zhang Xiaohua turned around and saluted the little monk in snow-white clothes. I'm Zhang Xiaohua from Huanxi Mountain Villa. Please enlighten me. The little monk also put his palms together and said, I'm Yuan from the Law Enforcement Hall of the Dalan Temple. Please enlighten me. Zhang Xiaohua saw that her opponent had also finished saluting. She crossed her fists and was about to attack with the Big Dipper magical fist when she heard Na Liao say, please wait. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and asked, is there anything else? Na Liao asked, aren't you a disciple of the Misty School? Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, yes. How do you know? Na Liao smiled and said, I heard what you said to senior brother Zhang just now. And didn't you introduce yourself as Huanxi Mountain Villa? Zhang Xiaohua suddenly realized that she really didn't pay attention to these details. Then Na Liao asked again, since you're not a disciple of the Misty School, how are you qualified to participate in the martial arts exhibition? Zhang Xiaohua blinked and said mysteriously, this is a matter between our Huanxi Mountain Villa and the Misty School. It's confidential. Please forgive me for not being able to answer. Na Liao seemed to be endless and asked again, just now Shu Zhang asked you if you had the confidence to defeat me. Why did you say that you only had the confidence to draw? Zhang Xiaohua said angrily, you little monk are so unreasonable. What I say to others is my privacy. You eavesdropped without my permission. Isn't that an invasion of my privacy? Even now, you're still curious about the reason. Do you want to compete or not? Look at the other rings, they're already fighting. Na Liao said kindly, know yourself and know your enemy. I also know your situation. Later, I'll tell you about me. What do you think? Zhang Xiaohua shook her head and said, I'm not interested. Na Liao said, my information is a secret. Do you want to hear it? Hearing the word, secret, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes lit up. She said, well, you have to tell me your secret after that. Yuan nodded in agreement. Zhang Xiaohua said, because I participated in the martial arts exhibition and competed in 12 matches. 10 of them ended in a draw, so I said that I was very confident in a draw. Do you understand? Hearing this, Yuan Liao rolled his eyes and casually asked, then how did you enter the third stage with such poor results? Zhang Xiaohua didn't care and said, I was the worst one to enter the second round. My number was 250, and I was the last one to enter the third round. It was all due to luck that I got a bye. Do you know that? Yuan pursed his lips and said, I understand. Oh right, let me ask you one last question. Zhang Xiaohua was extremely anxious, and said, are you done yet? Do you really not want to compete? Yuan Liao smiled and said, this is the last question. You only need to answer yes or no. Zhang Xiaohua frowned and said, it's really the last question. Yuan Liao asked, do you not know Qinggong? Zhang Xiaohua's face turned red. She could actually use the levitation technique last time, but it was still very immature. If she said no now, it would be a bit far-fetched. Zhang Xiaohua could only nod and say, yes. Then, she quickly changed the topic and asked, tell me your secret. Na Liao smiled mysteriously and said, my secret is very simple. Don't look at me coming to the 5th arena. My martial arts is the highest among the 3. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua laughed and naturally looked at the other arenas that were in the midst of fighting. She said, I don't believe it. You don't know me. Na Liao did not correct her, and only said, since you don't believe it, then fine. Number 250 Zhang Xiaohua, take this move of mine. After that, he immediately floated up. His figure was like a wisp of smoke, and immediately arrived in front of Zhang Xiaohua. His figure left a few blurry afterimages in the air. His qinggong was actually extremely brilliant. Zhang Xiaohua secretly knew that it was not good. She said, you little monk, you actually cheated. As soon as her words fell, Yuan Liao had already closed in. His hands were like playing a pipa. He waved his fingers and pointed at all the acupoints on Zhang Xiaohua's body. In just one move, he had sealed 36 major acupoints on Zhang Xiaohua's body. Then, Yuan Liao's figure flashed, and he appeared behind Zhang Xiaohua. He stood tall with his hands behind his back, and looked at the crowded heads under the arena with a lonely face. At that time, the bald little monk Yuan Liao, wearing clothes whiter than snow, floated at the edge of the arena. The only thing missing was a swaying fan, and it would be even more perfect. His charm was comparable to that of a talented scholar. He was simply the legendary jade tree facing the wind. In fact, one could not help but say that Yuan Liao was showing off. He had the ability to show off. Not to mention how divine his body was, just this exquisite technique of sealing acupoints was something that few of the Misty School's commoners could compare to. As everyone knew, the technique of sealing acupoints required internal energy to be injected into the body's acupoints in order to produce an effect. If one could condense their internal energy into the size of a needle, without 10 years of hard practice, it was simply impossible to achieve. In the Misty School, only the commoner 4th-ranked disciples, whose internal energy cultivation had reached a certain level, would pass the internal energy assessment and be taught according to the circumstances. This was also the reason why Zhang Xiaohua had never encountered an acupoint sealing technique in the commoner 1st-rank competition. The ethereal sect also had some talented disciples who were able to reach the standard of the acupoint sealing technique when they were at the 3rd rank of commoner clothes. However, those who were as proficient as Yuan Liao and had such deep inner strength were hard to find. Only the 4th rank of commoner clothes could compare to him. Therefore, it was not an exaggeration to say that Yuan Liao was the most powerful of the 3. It was no wonder that he stood to the side, allowing the wind to blow at his monk robe. His face was filled with loneliness. Geniuses were lonely. Just as Yuan Liao was standing at the edge of the arena in satisfaction, freely showing off his naked body, he felt the increasingly amazed gazes of the Misty School disciples below the arena. He also felt the increasingly quiet atmosphere around the 5th arena. He enjoyed it very much. He thought to himself, what a bunch of country bumpkins. Have they never been geniuses before? Sigh, what kind of realm was this? What kind of subduing was this? Wasn't this the realm that Elder Chang'eng wanted him to reach? However, Yuan Liao, who was intoxicated in his self-satisfaction, suddenly discovered a trace of disharmony. Yuan Liao discovered that the increasingly astonished gazes of the crowd below the stage weren't focused on him, but had instead bypassed him and concentrated behind him. Suddenly, he felt a trace of unease. Just as he was about to turn around to take a look, he heard a loud shout from behind him, "Get down!" Following that, he felt a huge force coming from his buttocks. He felt a foot kick his buttocks, kicking him straight out of the arena. Yuan Liao cursed inwardly and immediately wanted to get into a horse stance to stabilize his body. However, the strength of the kick on his buttocks was too great. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stand still. In an instant, his figure had already fallen outside the arena. However, at this moment, the little monk, Yuan Liao, used the tip of his right foot to tap the instep of his left foot. The inner strength in his dantian expanded and his entire body rose up. With a somersault, he landed on the arena. The disciples below the arena could not help but exclaim in unison. However, before he could land on the arena, he saw a small fist suddenly appear in front of him, smashing towards his face. Yuan Liao sneered. He raised his palm and was about to place it on the fist, preparing to use the force to leap back onto the arena. However, just as he was about to place his palm on the fist retracted and another fist struck towards his face. At this moment, Yuan Liao's old strength had dissipated and his new strength had yet to be generated. The circulation of his inner strength had also stagnated. His figure stopped there. If he wanted to return to the arena, he could only place his hand on the fist. Yuan Liao made up his mind, gritted his teeth, and stretched out another hand towards the fist. This time, the fist did not retract. It was still straight as it struck towards Yuan Liao's palm. Yuan Liao snickered in his heart. If his palm were to meet this fist, even if he could not return to the arena, he would still pull him down. It was hard to say who would win or lose. However, when the fist and palm met, an even greater force than before immediately struck Yuan Liao down. Normally, if Yuan Liao's inner strength was endless or if he was standing on flat ground, Yuan Liao had hundreds and thousands of ways to dodge. However, at this moment, his new strength had yet to be generated. His inner strength had stagnated and his figure was still in midair. How could there be any other outcome? Yuan Liao's white figure was helplessly struck down to the ground. The disciples below arena number 5 were baffled by what they were seeing. The two of them on this arena were muttering something to each other. The battles in the other arenas had been going on for a long time, but they had yet to start. Furthermore, as the two of them were chatting, this number 250 from Ethereal Sect was looking at the other arenas. Just as he was distracted, the little monk in white executed his acupoint sealing technique and sealed all 36 acupoints of his opponent. The disciples who were watching were shocked. What kind of genius was this? To be able to seal acupoints at such a young age. However, what shocked them was yet to come. The young monk who could strike acupoints stood naked at the edge of the arena. As for number 250, who had his acupoint struck, he looked left and right as though nothing had happened. He looked up and down and scratched his head. Then, he looked at the young monk who was standing at the edge of the arena. It was unknown what had happened to make the young monk give up his attack and take the initiative to stand at the edge of the arena. Facing the astonished gazes of the disciples below the arena, number 250 shrugged his shoulders and made a face. Then, with a loud shout, he kicked the young monk out of the arena with the wild goose landing on sand style. When the young monk in white landed helplessly on the ground, the disciples beneath arena number 5 could not believe their eyes. Was this a competition or an act? However, the young monk from the Dalan temple had indeed landed on the ground. In other words, number 250, who was rumored to be the weakest in arena number 5, was the first to kick the monk from the Dalan temple out of the arena. What kind of realm was this? The disciples beneath arena number 5 were stunned for a moment. Then, they no longer cared about the sect rules and their reputation as they cheered thunderously. The thunderous cheers actually affected the competition in the other 4 arenas. Everyone was distracted. Even Tang Shi, who had been at a disadvantage in arena number 1, was inspired by the familiar cheers. He actually gained the upper hand in one fell swoop. The more he fought, the braver he became. In the end, he finally forced his opponent out of the arena and obtained his second victory. In the other 2 arenas, the contestants from the Misty School were not in the mood to accept the challenge. They all passed the challenge. Only the contestant from arena number 4 was indeed much weaker than the young monk from the Dalan temple. That was why he failed his challenge. The Misty School's achievement was beyond everyone's expectations. As soon as Zhang Xiaohua climbed onto the arena, O Peng and Monk Changgung had already noticed the commotion in arena number 5. Monk Changgung did not need to be mentioned. That Yuan Liao was his trump card, so it was definitely the focus of his attention. As for O Peng, he felt that Monk Changgung was especially looking at arena number 5. Whatever the enemy desired was also his own desire. Since you're paying attention to the 5th arena, I naturally have to pay more attention to the 5th arena. Just the fact that the challenger of the 5th arena had not jumped onto the arena for a long time already made O Peng very angry. How could he not take a few more glances? O Peng even wondered if it was because the last ranked disciple did not dare to accept the challenge due to stage fright. However, when Zhang Xiaohua agilely climbed onto the arena, O Peng and Monk Changgung finally understood what was going on. As a result, their thoughts changed greatly. O Peng's mood was one of astonishment and joy. The reason for his astonishment was naturally because he did not know how this youth from the Huanxi Mountain Manor came to the martial arts exhibition. Moreover, he even made it to the 3rd stage of the competition. Therefore, when he heard Zhang Qingyue mention arena number 5, he felt a little puzzled. He still had some understanding of Zhang Xiaohua's background. It was already praiseworthy for him to be able to make it to the 3rd stage. If he was not the last, who else could it be? The reason for his joy was also very simple. Since Monk Changgung was paying attention to the arena, it was naturally a battle that he was confident in. Not to mention, Tianji horse racing was avoiding the weak points and highlighting the strong points. Zhang Xiaohua's last place had obviously attracted the attention of an expert from the Dalan Temple. Although he would fail the challenge, O Peng was still happy to see the inferior horse lose to the opponent's superior horse. Moreover, this horse was not his to begin with. What did its life or death have to do with O Peng? O Peng was secretly happy, but Monk Changgung's expression was ugly. This little monk Yuan Liao was just as he said. He was the most powerful among the few little monks. Monk Changgung wanted to use him to humiliate the young disciples of the Misty School. As soon as he stepped onto the arena, he encountered an opponent that could not be any weaker. Of course, how could a disciple who did not even know Qinggong be weaker than him? Although he could easily win this match, he had also lost a great opportunity. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua and Yuan Liao began chatting like old friends. Monk Changgung, who was below the arena, rolled his eyes and pondered for a moment before saying to O Peng, "Chief O, this old monk suddenly thought of a problem. The rules we talked about just now seem a little inappropriate. This old monk would like to make some changes." O Peng's heart skipped a beat. He carefully asked, "Master, how do you want to make changes?" Monk Changgung smiled and said, "What we talked about just now was the result of a match. The loser naturally cannot compete again, but what about the disciple who won? Can he still continue with the following matches?" O Peng secretly gritted his teeth and thought, "This old bald donkey, you are the one who set the rules. What can I say? You didn't even say anything about the following matches. What do you want me to say? Aren't you just afraid that after seeing your disciple encounter a weak opponent, you won't be able to compete again after one match?" Thus, O Peng pretended to be thinking and said, "Then let's do as Master says. If I lose a match, I won't be able to participate in the following matches. As for the winner of the match, he can still participate in the following matches." In fact, while O Peng was pretending to be thinking, Yuan Liao had already activated his acupoint sealing plan. However, in the eyes of O Peng and Monk Changgung, such skills were not worth mentioning. Therefore, they watched while talking. As for Zhang Xiaohua, she was looking around mischievously. While she was not being sealed, O Peng was speaking. When O Peng finished speaking, Zhang Xiaohua happened to kick Yuan Liao off the arena. The cooperation between the two could not be said to be tacit. On the other hand, when Monk Changgung saw Yuan Liao being kicked off the arena, he could not help but be alarmed. He actually lost his composure and stood up. However, just as he stood up, he immediately realized that he had lost his composure. When he sat down again, he heard the end of O Peng's words. He could not help but be infuriated as he thought to himself, did this fellow collude with the little fellow in the arena? He waited for me to finish speaking before taking action. If he had taken action earlier, I would have been able to set a new rule to allow the loser to be revived. But now that the words have been spoken, it's like spilled water. How can I take them back? Monk Chang-gung looked helplessly at the arena and nodded heavily. He was extremely unhappy. Oh Peng looked at Monk Chang-gung's embarrassed look and was overjoyed. He thought, could this be the legendary saying, man proposes, God disposes? At this moment, Zhang Qingyue also walked back to the reed mat shelter. He had jumped off the arena and it was not appropriate for him to use his qinggong in front of everyone. He could only walk back step by step. His back was facing the arena. Before he could reach the reed mat shelter, the match at Arena 5 had ended. Hearing the thunderous cheers behind him, Zhang Qingyue naturally turned around to look. All he saw was Zhang Xiaohua standing alone and cupping her fists back and forth. She looked smug and he was puzzled. When O Peng saw Zhang Qingyue return, he beckoned him over. Then, he whispered into Zhang Qingyue's ear, that Zhang something, what's going on? Zhang Qingyue also whispered into his ear, it's Zhang Xiaohua. I'm not sure what the reason is. Since I won, I'll ask again in the future. Oh Peng nodded with a smile. Not long after, the matches in the 5 arenas ended. The disciples of the Misty School jumped off the arena. The 3 young monks of the Dalan Temple walked back to the reed mat shelter. The 3 young monks stood in order and bowed to Monk Chang-gung with their palms pressed together. 2 of them looked ashamed while the young monk with snow-white robes was flushed red. Monk Chang-gung was a straightforward person. He had a rare smile on his face as he said, it's fine, it's fine. I brought you to the Misty School to learn from each other. It's to prevent you from closing your doors and not broadening your horizons, thinking that you're the best in the martial arts world. Now that you've competed with the disciples of the Misty School, you've realized that you're just a frog in a well. When you go back, you'll have to work harder so that you won't be disappointed by today's defeat. It was unknown if the 3 young monks would listen to him. They only bowed and returned to stand behind Monk Chang-gung. I'm going to add a hole in the next few chapters. Which one do you think it is? There's a post in the book reviews and comments section. Let's see if everyone's guess is right. Please bookmark it, thank you. Chapter 190. O Peng invited Monk Chang-gung to drink some tea, but he still asked carefully, Master, what do you think of the following matches? There was no joy from his victory at all. Just as Monk Chang-gung was about to speak, a dark and thick young monk suddenly stepped out from behind him. He clasped his palms together and bowed, Grand Marshal Uncle, I would like to challenge the disciple who defeated junior brother Yuan Liao. O Peng found it funny. Seriously, to think that he would pick a fight with such a mediocre youth. He did not say a word and looked at Monk Chang-gung. The old monk pondered for a moment and said, Yuan Kong, he just finished a match. If you want to compete, you have to let him rest for a while. Don't you think so? The dark and thick Yuan Kong stiffened his neck and said, what's there to rest for? I don't know what evil technique he used to make junior brother Yuan Liao's acupoint sealing technique fail. He only kicked and punched once in the arena. How much strength could he use? The inner strength he used can be replenished after a short rest. Why does he need to rest? Monk Chang-gung saw that Yuan Kong was so anxious that he was even doing manual labor. He shouted, Yuan Kong, what are you talking about? How does your master usually teach you? A Buddhist disciple should have the rules of a Buddhist disciple. Don't talk nonsense. When Yuan Kong heard this, he immediately said, this disciple knows his mistake. However, he just stood there and did not return. Yuan Kong's evil technique made O Peng's heart skip a beat. When Yuan Liao's acupoint was sealed, he was talking to Monk Chang-gung and did not see it clearly. He only thought that the young monk had made a mistake and failed to seal Zhang Xiaohua's acupoint. Now that he thought about it carefully, there was still something to ponder. Yuan Liao was an outstanding disciple of the Dalan Temple's new generation. His acupoint sealing technique looked abnormally experienced. He must have practiced it for a long time. Zhang Xiaohua was standing still when he was struck. There was no reason for him to make a mistake, but why did he fail? This was truly a problem. Peng glanced at Sky Origin from the corner of his eyes and thought to himself, this bald donkey must be full of doubts, thinking that it's a trick from my misty school. I'll ignore him for now and let him have his doubts. But when he saw the dark-skinned monk in front of him, Peng didn't know how to answer him. From the looks of it, Monk Changgung didn't berate him to return and get him to extinguish the thought of challenging Zhang Xiaohua. He probably had the intention of getting back some face from Yuan Kong. Peng had a general idea of Zhang Xiaohua's standards. She had defeated Yuan Kong purely by luck. Yuan Kong had been too confident in his acupoint strikes and had let his guard down, resulting in him being kicked out of the arena. For this Sky Origin to be able to stand out, based on his age, his martial arts must be stronger than Zhang Xiaohua's. Once he went up on stage, he would definitely beat Zhang Xiaohua off the stage. How could he let Zhang Xiaohua accept the challenge? However, if he didn't let Zhang Xiaohua accept the challenge, what reason did he have? Say that Zhang Xiaohua wasn't a disciple of the Misty School. Alright, the previous match didn't count. The Misty School still had to send a disciple to face Yuan Kong. Looking at the previous matches, it would be difficult for a rank 1, or even a rank 2 or rank 3 cloth robe to be a match for Yuan Kong. The Misty School's reputation would likely be tarnished. Forget it, I'll let Zhang Xiaohua come out. At most, I'll just admit defeat. After all, he wasn't a disciple of the Misty School. It would be acceptable if he lost. What Peng didn't know was that Yuan Kong had long known that Zhang Xiaohua wasn't a disciple of the Misty School. However, he didn't know that there was something fishy about it. He didn't know if he should tell Monk Changgung about his defeat. With Peng making up his mind, just as he was about to speak, Monk Changgung made the decision for him. He said to Sky Origin, "Take your leave for now. I'll call you again when that disciple has some rest." Then, he turned to ask Peng, "Gang leader what do you think?" Peng smiled and said, "Master, you're right. I was thinking the same thing." What a joke. You've already spoken for me. What else can I say? Immediately, Monk Changgung said, "Since the rank 1 match is over, let's have our Dalan Temple's disciples spar with your rank 2 disciple. What do you think?" Peng hurriedly said, "I was thinking the same thing." Just as he finished speaking, 4 slightly older monks walked out from behind Monk Changgung. One of them was Sky Origin. When Monk Changgung saw this, he waved his hand and said, "Sky Origin, take a rest. You'll spar with that rank 1 disciple later." Sky Origin clasped his hands together and said, "Martial Granduncle, there's no need. It won't be too late to rest after I finish this match." Monk Changgung wanted to say more, but Sky Origin said, "That disciple has already competed. If I compete again, it'll be fair. Otherwise, the people of Jianghu will laugh at our Dalan Temple for using numbers to bully someone." Monk Changgung nodded and once again revealed a rare smile. He didn't say anything else. Seeing this, Peng couldn't help but frown. Only a fool would believe that the Dalan Temple didn't come prepared. This competition was just a competition. Finding the adult disciples of the Dalan Temple to compete in the arena was the right thing to do. But Monk Changgung brought a bunch of young monks to spar with Jianghu's low-level disciples. What kind of rules was this? Peng couldn't figure it out. Moreover, these low-level disciples of his were the real deal. There was no way to fake it. But these young monks in front of him weren't low-level disciples. Who could tell if they were low-level disciples or not? In terms of age, they were about the same. But some of them looked young. Peng wanted to ask if these young monks were really low-level disciples. But even if he had the courage, he still didn't want to offend the Dalan Temple's law enforcement elder. However, Peng thought about it again. Even if the Dalan Temple came to provoke him, they would still be righteous. They wouldn't use high-level disciples to impersonate low-level disciples. Moreover, they had a deep foundation. It was understandable that a few geniuses would emerge among the low-level disciples. Thinking of this, Peng completely extinguished the idea of inquiring. When Zhang Qingyue saw the 4 young monks come out again, he didn't say anything else. He brought them to the arena. The 4 young monks were also straightforward. They each picked one. Sky Origin chose arena number 5. Although he knew that Zhang Xiaohua wouldn't go on stage, perhaps he wanted to familiarize himself with the environment first. There was no need to talk about the 5 challenges on the stage in detail. Only one of them was a genuine 3rd-tier cotton clothing disciple challenge. Just like the previous 2nd-tier cotton clothing disciple challenge, the first round of challengers were all ranked higher. Their strength was naturally the best amongst the 2nd-tier cotton clothing disciple. Their martial arts level should be above the average level of the 3rd-tier cotton clothing disciple. As for the 3rd-tier cotton clothing disciple challenge master, he was a disciple with a mediocre performance amongst the 3rd-tier cotton clothing disciple. In the end, this challenge competition still ended with the challenger winning. As for the other 4 matches between the Misty School and the Dalan Temple, they were a bit tragic. The Dalan Temple's monks came prepared. They had thoroughly studied the martial arts of the Misty School. In addition, the Misty School's disciples were indeed inferior to them. These 4 challenges were all defeated. However, even if this was the case, the spectating disciples were well aware of the situation. Previously, Yuan Liao's pressure point sealing technique had already rung an alarm bell for them. His level of martial arts against the first-level disciples was already so high, so there was no need to talk about the next one. Although Yuan Liao was kicked off the arena, it was only because he was overconfident. It had nothing to do with the level of his martial arts. This time, Zhang Qingyue didn't rush back. He just stood in a corner of the arena and calmly watched the battle. He hoped that there would be a disciple like Zhang Xiaohua who kicked the Dalan Temple's little monk off the arena. Unfortunately, he was disappointed. After Zhang Qingyue sent the 4 little monks back to the reed mat shelter, the challenges on the 5 arenas continued. Inside the reed mat shelter, Peng saw the results and naturally wasn't surprised. He took a sip of tea and said to Chang Gung with a smile, "The Dalan Temple's foundation is really deep. The level of these low-level disciples is much higher than my Misty School's disciples of the same age. This humble one admires them greatly." Chang Gung's face didn't reveal a trace of a smile as he said, "This is nothing. These low-level disciples are only the new generation of the law enforcement hall. They still have a long road ahead of them. If..." He paused for a moment and chose his words carefully before continuing, "If they can't even cross this small gap, how can they be of any use in the future?" These words were very unreasonable. The expressions of the people sitting to Peng's right had already changed. However, Peng turned a deaf ear to them and said with a smile, "The Dalan Temple has such outstanding talents. Congratulations. In the future, Jianghu will naturally shine with extraordinary splendor. We look forward to it." After the 2 finished speaking, they looked at the arena again. The number of people challenging the 3rd level was not as many as the 1st level. In other words, there were only 10 disciples. In the first round of the competition, all of them were ranked among the top and had the chance to reach the 3rd level. However, because of the Dalan Temple's interference, only one of them passed. Under normal circumstances, the number of disciples who passed the 2nd round would be lower than the number of disciples who passed the 1st round. However, today was an exception. Out of 5 disciples, 3 of them passed. As for whether they were truly at the 3rd level or if someone had deliberately let them pass, the Misty School's disciples wouldn't pursue the matter. Peng also wouldn't pursue the matter. After the challenge was over, Peng asked Chang Gung for his opinion. At this time, there weren't many disciples behind Chang Gung who hadn't fought yet. Chang Gung pondered for a moment and said, "Sect leader Oh, this old monk only brought my disciples to your sect to learn from each other. We don't have any intention of having a comprehensive competition. Everyone is only here to exchange martial arts. There are still a few disciples behind this old monk who haven't entered the ring yet, so there's no need for a challenge." O Peng smiled and said, "Reverend, you are a guest from afar. This humble one will naturally obey your orders. How will the Reverend arrange it?" Chang Gung turned around and said, "Other than Yuan Xing, everyone who hasn't entered the arena can go." After he finished speaking, 5 people walked out from behind him. They were all monks around 16 or 17 years old. Chang Gung said to O Peng, "Yuan Xing is different from the others. He will fight after he enters the arena. As for the others, Chief O, please make arrangements." When O Peng heard this, he was obviously stunned. He couldn't help but take a few more glances at the ordinary-looking monk behind monk Chang Gung. He muttered in his heart, "What kind of trick is this old bald donkey playing?" Zhang Qingyue received O Peng's order and brought the 5 monks to the arena. However, there was a problem when selecting the disciples from the Misty School. The disciples of the Misty School began to be taught weapons from the 3rd rank onwards. The Misty School's swordsmanship was also famous in the pugilistic world. Not to mention the Misty 7 Swords, which was the sect's signature swordsmanship, many of the other swordsmanship were also famous in the pugilistic world. Many of the disciples of the Misty School practiced swordsmanship. As for fist techniques, they only practiced at the 1st or 2nd rank of the pugilistic world. Only a small number of disciples who didn't have the talent to practice swordsmanship chose to practice other methods such as staff techniques. There weren't many disciples who only practiced fist and palm techniques. In comparison, the Dalan Temple was famous for their fist, palm, and leg techniques. Their weapons were also mainly staffs. They rarely even used sabers, much less swords. Now, the 5 people standing in the arena were all barehanded. They were probably prepared to face their opponents barehanded. Since that was the case, the Misty School couldn't bring out their swords. This was because Chang Gung had made it clear that this was only an exchange of martial arts and not a battle to the death. Actually, wasn't this clearly bullying? Using one's strength against the opponent's weakness. Fortunately, the Misty School was also a large sect in the pugilistic world. Their disciples were also very outstanding. Not long after, they picked out 5 disciples of similar age who were also very skilled in martial arts. While the 5 pairs of disciples were competing in the arena, O Peng didn't pay much attention to them. He occasionally glanced at Yuan Xing and secretly analyzed Chang Gung's thoughts. Chang Gung seemed to have noticed this as well. However, he didn't express anything and only watched the competition in the arena with great interest. On the arena, the 10 disciples were fighting in a group. Each of them had their own unique skills and wonderful moves. The 5 Misty School disciples attacked like a tide. The 5 Dalan Temple monks were also like pillars. They used their profound inner energy and simple moves to firmly resist the attacks. It was a stalemate. However, as time passed, the gap between the 10 disciples slowly became apparent. The Dalan Temple disciples' fists were still strong. Every move was made with full force and didn't seem weak. On the other hand, the Misty School disciples were obviously unable to withstand the attacks. It was obvious that their inner energy was insufficient. Most of them chose to wander. In fact, this was very normal. Since the Misty School was named Misty, it was natural for them to excel in Qinggong. Every disciple would study Qinggong while practicing sword techniques. In a situation where their inner energy was insufficient, they would naturally choose to use Qinggong as a tactic. However, even though this lightness skill could allow him to gain the upper hand for a while, it was ultimately not the way of a king. Just from the scene alone, the ethereal sect disciples below the ring already felt a sense of helplessness rising from the bottom of their hearts. They were afraid that they would lose this match again. If the previous few matches were all challenges, it would be a competition between outstanding low-level disciples fighting for a high-level position. If they lost to the Dalan Temple, they could still accept it. They would feel that the young disciples weren't good at martial arts and needed more time to hone their skills. However, this competition in 5 arenas was obviously another way for the Dalan Temple to test or provoke the Misty School. In the huge Misty School, no one was able to defeat the Dalan Temple disciples. If they lost this match, the morale of the Misty School disciples would plummet and they would be ridiculed in Jianghu. However, things didn't change according to one's will. Under the secret support of the hundreds of disciples below the arena, it didn't take long for the 5 arenas to determine the winner. Although the Misty School disciples didn't want to see this, they still lost all 5 matches. Seeing the 5 disciples dejectedly walk back into the crowd, Zhang Qingyue felt very uncomfortable. However, he didn't show any expression on his face. He was still as gentle as ever as he led the 5 arrogant Dalan Temple monks back to the reed mat shelter. In the reed mat shelter, Peng's face was gloomy. No one would be happy about this. In his opinion, even though the Misty School wasn't prepared and hastily accepted the challenge, they should at least be able to win 1 or 2 matches. Now that they had lost all 5 matches, they had lost all face. In fact, Peng didn't have any good intentions towards monk Changgeng's arrival. Changgeng was the law-enforcing elder of a super sect. Be it in terms of martial arts, seniority, or connections, Peng couldn't match up to him. If Changgeng humiliated him a little, Peng could have just endured it. However, he didn't expect them to lose so badly. From the beginning until now, if it wasn't for Zhang Xiaohua taking advantage of Changgeng's contempt and Tang Shi taking advantage of Zhang Xiaohua's victory, his Misty School would have lost every match. For a sect, this wasn't just a matter of being slapped in the face, it also had many other implications. However, since things had come to this point, Peng could only grit his teeth and swallow his pride. He suppressed the dissatisfaction in his heart and squeezed out a smile. "Great Master, it seems like your esteemed temple is indeed better than my Misty School. However, in terms of nurturing the next generation of disciples, we are inferior. This humble one admires you." Monk Changgeng shook his head and said, "Sect leader O is too modest. Who doesn't know that the Misty School has a deep foundation? The martial arts of these disciples are not worth mentioning. Even if it was your esteemed sect's core disciples or elite disciples, any one of them would be able to defeat 10 of them." When Peng heard this, his heart trembled. He quickly smiled apologetically and said, "Great Master, you must be joking. Right now, there are many elite disciples in this square. The one in the second arena was also an elite disciple, but he was actually defeated. That's why this humble one is a bit unhappy." Monk Changgeng didn't point it out and continued, "Sect leader O is hiding his true abilities. A while ago, the entire Jianghu witnessed the Misty School's generosity. Everyone praised sect leader O for his great talent and bold vision. You created a great situation for the Misty School and your reputation is comparable to the Dalan Temple. This humble one heard about it and thus had the opportunity to come to your esteemed sect to witness the new atmosphere of the Misty School." When Peng heard this, he secretly cursed in his heart, "This old bald donkey is really up to no good. He wants to see the strength of my Misty School. Sigh, it seems that my Misty School has no choice but to lose face today." Thus, Peng hurriedly said, "Great Master, you flatter me. My Misty School is only a small sect. How can it be compared to the Dalan Temple, a super sect in the Jianghu? It's just the wild guesses of the ignorant children in the Jianghu. It really can't be taken seriously." Monk Changgeng looked at Peng meaningfully and said, "Sect leader O, actually, your Misty School and the Dalan Temple have been friends for thousands of years. Although the Misty School is declining, my Dalan Temple has never dared to look down on the Misty School." These words made Peng's back break out in cold sweat. He repeatedly said that he didn't dare. However, Monk Changgeng didn't say much about this. He immediately changed the topic and said, the next match requires Yuan Xing to go on stage. However, the match with him is a bit special. When O Peng heard this, he was puzzled and said, special? Great master, please explain. What is that foreshadowing? Can't anyone guess it? Please collect it, thank you. Chapter 191. Chang Gung stroked the white triangular beard under his chin, his eyes revealing a trace of warmth as he said, this Yuan Xing is an orphan. He grew up in a mountain village next to the Dalan temple. 2 years ago, when he was hunting in the mountains, he was injured by a tiger and wolf and almost lost his life. Fortunately, he was saved by a monk in my temple. Later on, he became a lay disciple of the temple. I saw that he had a pure heart, so I accepted him into the law enforcement hall. O Peng smiled and said, a monk's benevolence is really not bad. Master's help will definitely be repaid in the future. Chang Gung continued, this child has a pure heart, which suits my temperament. I originally wanted to pass on the martial arts of the Dalan temple to my disciples. However, he is already old and the meridians in his body have already formed. On the path of inner strength, his future is bleak. I am currently considering how to teach him inner strength. O Peng frowned and thought to himself, a pure heart, which suits your temperament. Only a ghost would believe that. However, what's the point of saying so much to me? When Chang Gung saw O Peng frowning, he knew that O Peng didn't understand. He continued, however, Yuan Xing is a natural martial arts talent. After staying in the law enforcement hall for 2 years, he has practiced countless fist and palm techniques. He has a lot of experience in fist and kick techniques. This time, I came to your sect to bring him along so that he can see the world. O Peng still did not understand and asked, then what's so special about this competition? Compared to the competition just now. Before he could finish his words, O Peng suddenly understood and said, Master, you mean that we won't use inner strength and will only compete with our fists and feet? Chang Gung nodded and said, that's exactly what I mean. I want to ask your disciple for guidance in the area of fists and feet. Hearing this, O Peng was a little embarrassed. To be honest, which of the disciples of the Misty School in the mountains had not practiced inner strength cultivation methods? When these disciples with internal strength techniques competed, they would naturally or involuntarily use their internal strength against their opponents. This was almost a habit. If they were not allowed to use their internal strength, it would be like cutting off their arms. How could they compete? At this moment, O Peng thought of Zhang Xiaohua. This youth didn't seem to know any inner strength. However, Monk Chang'eng had mentioned that he wanted to seek guidance from the disciples of the Misty School. If he were to push him out, Monk Chang'eng would have something against him. Furthermore, Yuan Kong was eyeing Zhang Xiaohua covetously in the reed mat shelter. He was waiting to find Zhang Xiaohua to vent his anger for his junior brother. It wasn't appropriate to let Zhang Xiaohua out now. What should he do? O Peng thought for a moment and beckoned Zhang Qingyue over. He lowered his head and said a few words. Zhang Qingyue nodded and said to Yuan Xing, Master, please come with me. After saying that, he led Yuan Xing out of the reed mat shelter. But strangely, when Yuan Xing moved, Yuan Kong followed him out. Zhang Qingyue was somewhat puzzled, but when Zhang Qingyue leaped onto the stage, Yuan Xing, who was below the stage, grabbed Yuan Xing's armpit and pushed him onto the stage. Zhang Qingyue realized that Yuan Xing was the same as Zhang Xiaohua. He did not know Qinggong. When Yuan Xing stood still on the ring, Zhang Qingyue circulated his inner strength and told him the conditions of the competition. He specifically said that he needed disciples from the Misty School. Zhang Xiaohua was originally happy when he heard the conditions of the competition. Wasn't this a competition tailor-made for him? He was eager to give it a try, but when he heard that he needed disciples from the Misty School, he immediately withered. Although he was from the Huanxi Manor, he wasn't a disciple of the Misty School. Since Zhang Qingyue said so, he must be talking about him. In this square full of people, only he wasn't from the Misty School. Zhang Qingyue's conditions were barely satisfactory. The square full of Misty School disciples was silent. They had been cultivating inner strength for a long time. It was difficult to guarantee that they could beat this Dalan Temple monk without using their inner strength. Just when Zhang Qingyue was feeling a little awkward, a voice came from below the ring, "Disciple Zhang Xiaohu is willing to give it a try." Zhang Qingyue looked up. Of course, it was Zhang Xiaohua who was standing next to Zhang Xiaohua. Seeing Zhang Xiaohu volunteer himself, Zhang Qingyue frowned. He wanted to refuse, but out of all the people in the square, only Zhang Xiaohu stood out. If he didn't go up on the ring, it would disappoint him. Moreover, he had only been a disciple for less than 2 months. If he was defeated by Yuan Xing, it wouldn't be a loss of face for the Misty School. It would also be easier to explain in the Jianghu in the future. Immediately, Zhang Qingyue, who had figured out the trick, nodded and said, "Then Marshal Nephew Zhang, please go up on the ring." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly ran towards ring number 5. Nonsense, the escalator was still there and she hadn't had time to take it away. After Zhang Xiaohua set up the escalator, Zhang Xiaohu walked up the ring very seriously. Zhang Qingyue asked in a low voice, "Zhang Xiaohu, how many times have you practiced fist techniques? How many types do you know?" Zhang Xiaohu told him everything. Zhang Qingyue nodded and said, "I understand. You can go now. Be careful." After saying this, he walked down the ring and reported to O Peng. O Peng, who was in the reed mat shelter, saw Zhang Xiaohu go up on the ring. He was delighted. How could he have forgotten about this disciple? He was probably the only disciple in the Misty School who didn't know much about inner strength. Moreover, he had just entered the sect. If he lost, it would be easy to find excuses. However, he didn't know how good his fists were. He seemed to have heard someone say that his fists were pretty good. With that thought in mind, O Peng looked at the disciple standing to his right. Coincidentally, Wen Hai was also looking in his direction. The master and disciple looked at each other and nodded inwardly. Not long after, Zhang Qingyue returned and whispered a few words in O Peng's ear. O Peng's expression rarely changed as he blurted out, "What? He only knows one." But he immediately realized that he had lost his composure. He shut his mouth and waved weakly, gesturing for Zhang Qingyue to step aside. Monk Changgung was very sensitive to the reactions of the Misty School. He had brought Yuan Xing to the Misty School for 2 reasons. First, it was to broaden his horizons. Second, it was to give the Misty School a difficult problem to see how they would deal with it. However, the Misty School didn't take the difficult problem that he had racked his brains to dig out seriously. They quickly found Yuan Xing an opponent. He was very surprised. Did the Misty School have a disciple like Yuan Xing? Or did they just find a scapegoat to deal with the problem? Monk Changgung wanted to ask, but at this time, the battle on the arena had already begun. Yuan Xing was indeed fierce. He immediately used the Dalan Temple's basic fist technique, Arhat Fist. This Arhat Fist was similar to the Arhat Fist that was circulated in the pugilistic world. Not only did it have many more moves, the moves were also much more exquisite. Moreover, Zhang Xiaohua, who was watching from below the arena, even realized that there were a few moves in the Arhat Fist that Monk Yuan Xing used that were similar to the moves in his Fist of the Big Dipper. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but be astonished. On the other hand, Zhang Xiaohu steadied himself and used a set of 6 directions fist technique. He was neither too fast nor too slow. It was exactly the same as Yuan Xing's Arhat Fist. Every move was not at a disadvantage. Not long after, Yuan Xing finished using his Arhat Fist. He changed his move again. He was using the Dalan Temple Skunda Palm, which was not taught to outsiders. This Skunda Palm was a fierce fist technique in the Dalan Temple that was combined with inner strength. It was extremely powerful. Now in Yuan Xing's hands, although he didn't have any inner strength, he could still vaguely feel the fierceness of it. Yuan Xing originally thought that since he used the Dalan Temple's fist technique, Zhang Xiaohu would definitely use the Misty School's secret fist technique to fight him. However, he saw that Zhang Xiaohu was still calm and unhurried. He was still using the same set of 6 directions fist. Yuan Xing didn't know the whole story. He was slightly angered. I'm using my school's secret fist technique to fight, but you're only using the 6 directions fist that is commonly seen in the pugilistic world. Isn't this clearly looking down on me? As a result, Yuan Xing became even more determined. He constantly changed his moves, trying to force Zhang Xiaohu to change his fist technique. It must be said that Yuan Xing was favored by monk Chang Gung for a reason. He was able to use the Dalan Temple's secret fist techniques and palm techniques one by one. In the beginning, he used them one by one, but later on, he was no longer limited to any one set of fist techniques. He was actually able to integrate all the Dalan Temple's fist techniques. He was able to casually use them as if they were just one move of a set of fist techniques. But even so, Yuan Xing's heart fire was even more exuberant. Although Zhang Xiaohu was on the verge of collapsing, he still did not change to the ethereal sex fist techniques. Instead, he continued to use the most common set of 6 joint fists. Isn't this clearly looking down on me? Yuan Xing was secretly angry. His hands and feet were constantly changing their moves. Like a multi-armed guanyin, he attacked Zhang Xiaohu from all directions. On the other hand, Zhang Xiaohu was suffering unspeakably. The fist technique he was proficient in was the 6 directions fist. He only used the other fist techniques as a reference. If he were to use them against an opponent, they would definitely be full of flaws. He might as well just use the 6 directions fist. Moreover, Zhang Xiaohu didn't have much experience against an opponent. He didn't have many opportunities to compete. Although he was proficient in the 6 directions fist, he didn't have enough practice. Soon, he was at a disadvantage. If Yuan Xing hadn't been determined to force him to use the Misty School's secret fist techniques, he might have already been knocked out of the arena by Yuan Xing. Yuan Xing's fists and feet were like a mountain pressing down on Zhang Xiaohu. It made his chest feel stuffy and he couldn't breathe. It was just like when Zhang Xiaohua was competing a few days ago. Zhang Xiaohu felt that something in his heart was being obliterated bit by bit. Maybe failure isn't far away. Zhang Xiaohu thought to himself. His movements were somewhat sluggish. Seeing this, Yuan Xing was secretly delighted. This guy is so unreasonable. Even now, he's still looking down on me. See if I don't throw you out of the arena. Thinking of this, his eyes naturally flashed with contempt. This gaze fell into Zhang Xiaohu's eyes and was imprinted in his heart. He couldn't help but think of his own situation in the Misty School. Some disciples were disdainful, some disciples were flattering, and even Qin Chen's words, these disciples, if it were my senior Chang'e, it would only take 2 or 3 moves. These constantly flashed in Zhang Xiaohu's mind. He couldn't help but feel unyielding. There was a voice shouting in his heart, don't ask where a hero comes from. Miracles come from people. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohu's eyes immediately became lively. His fists and feet were also filled with power. The obscurity of his moves became smoother and smoother. As mentioned earlier, Zhang Xiaohu was the same as Zhang Xiaohua. They both had too little fighting experience. Zhang Xiaohua's North Star magical fist was slowly refined in the second round of the competition. Only then did it grow in power. Zhang Xiaohu was the same. Although he was familiar with the moves of the 6 joint fists, his fighting experience was not as good as his younger brothers. When Yuan Xing exchanged moves with him, the pressure he gave him became the catalyst for the growth of Zhang Xiaohu's fist technique. Zhang Xiaohu's change shocked Yuan Xing. He originally wanted to force Zhang Xiaohu to display the secret fist technique, but he didn't change. Furthermore, the flaws in his moves were exposed. Yuan Xing was about to give up his original idea and knock Zhang Xiaohu off the stage. Unexpectedly, Zhang Xiaohu's fist technique didn't change, but the fist intent within changed. It became more vigorous and aggressive. Yuan Xing knew that things weren't going well. He displayed even more fist techniques. Everyone watching below the stage only had one thought: this monk is really impressive. I'm afraid that he has learned all the fist techniques of the Dalan Temple. The disciples in the square were dazzled as they looked at Yuan Xing's endless moves. They all thought to themselves, if I were to face such an opponent, but I couldn't use my inner strength, how would I win? There might be thousands of answers, but there was one thing that they all agreed on. That was, they all believed that if they were on the stage, they would definitely be stronger than Zhang Xiaohu. He wouldn't just use the same set of 6 harmonies fist technique over and over again. Furthermore, they also believed that Zhang Xiaohu's defeat was inevitable. It was only a matter of time. Although they didn't wish for such a situation to happen, the situation in front of them was exactly that. Perhaps the people in the square all had the same thoughts. Perhaps O Peng and the rest in the reed mat shed also had the same thoughts. Perhaps all the martial artists in the pugilistic world had the same thoughts. However, below the first stage, Zhang Xiaohua, who was secretly clenching his fists and had his heart in his throat, didn't think so. In his heart, he firmly believed that his second brother would definitely win. Even though he had already seen that Zhang Xiaohu's fist technique was a little weak and his morale was a little low. Although Zhang Xiaohu was still at a disadvantage, the sharp Zhang Xiaohua had already seen that little bit of willpower in Zhang Xiaohu's fist technique was rising. He also saw that little bit of unyieldingness in his moves was growing strong. However, it was also because of this that his heart was raised even higher. He was afraid that his second brother would be defeated by the monk before he mastered his fist technique. What Zhang Xiaohua saw was the spirit of the fist technique and Zhang Xiaohu's willpower. The disciples of the Misty School, on the other hand, were looking at the power of the fist technique. As time passed bit by bit, Zhang Xiaohu wasn't defeated like they had imagined. Zhang Xiaohu was like a small blade of grass. Under the heavy pressure of a huge rock, he grew bit by bit. Slowly, gradually, he unknowingly lifted the huge rock. From between the gaps of the huge rock, a tender bud emerged. At this moment, the huge rock could no longer suppress and strangle this tenacious life. At this moment, Yuan Xing felt like a huge rock. He was really regretful, but he also understood a little. He regretted that he hadn't ruthlessly attacked earlier and knocked his opponent out of the arena. He understood that he had overestimated his opponent. It seemed like his opponent really only knew one set of 6 harmonies fists. Yuan Xing was furious. I came here to ask for guidance on fist techniques from your Misty School. I first showed you all the fist techniques from the Dalan Temple one by one, but you guys only knew one set of 6 harmonies fists. Is this still the Jianghu where it's rude to come and go? But now, whether Yuan Xing was angry, shocked, or indignant, the opponent in front of him was no longer the one who had just entered the arena. He no longer had the strength to defeat him easily. His 6 harmonies fists had been refined to the extreme. No matter what fist technique or palm technique he used, he could use a simple move to easily resolve it. As soon as Yuan Xing relaxed a little, he would use a simple move to find his flaw and force him to quickly change his move to make up for the flaw. The disciples of the Misty School saw that the power of Zhang Xiaohu's fist technique was getting stronger and stronger. From the beginning when he was exhausted from defending, to now when he was able to attack and slowly turn the situation around, they couldn't help but feel hope rising from the bottom of their hearts. Once that little bit of hope was born, it spread and grew. Everyone's eyes were burning and their throats were itching. Unknowingly, someone shouted out, "Zhang Xiaohu, you can do it." Thus, with a single shout, everyone started cheering for Zhang Xiaohu. The entire arena was filled with shouts of, "Zhang Xiaohua, you can do it." O Peng and Monk Changgung, who were in the reed mat shelter, seemed to already know the final outcome from the moment Yuan Xing and Zhang Xiaohu began their match. After all, the two of them were famous experts in the Jianghu. Once this low-level disciple made a move, they would naturally know who was stronger and who was weaker. Thus, the two of them casually chatted about the matters of the Jianghu. Monk Changgung knew his disciple well and didn't look at the arena. This was a competition that didn't use internal energy, so there wouldn't be any injuries. Naturally, he didn't have to worry. Needless to say, the disciples of the Misty School would know that they were inferior to Yuan Xing the moment they made a move. On the other hand, Peng watched as he chatted. If it were someone else who was at a disadvantage the moment they entered the arena, he might not have watched. After all, he knew that Zhang Xiaohu only knew one set of 6 harmonies fists. Seeing how Yuan Xing was throwing out the Dalan Temple's fist techniques as if they were free, how could Zhang Xiaohu be a match for him? However, there was another reason why Peng was watching so attentively. Ever since Zhang Xiaohu entered the Misty School, when Wenhai hadn't taught him any martial arts. It wasn't that he didn't do his best as a master, but that Wenhai was truly worried. The Misty School's disciples were trained from a young age and taught martial arts. There had never been a disciple as old as Zhang Xiaohu who had entered the school. For example, Aunt Qin of Mingzue Hall had entered the Misty School and didn't seek guidance from a master. She had her own martial arts, unlike Zhang Xiaohu who had to learn from scratch. However, since Wenhai had accepted Zhang Xiaohu as a disciple, he naturally didn't want to treat him unfairly. Therefore, after careful consideration, he sought out his master, Peng, to ask for Peng's permission to impart the Misty School's core inner strength mantra, ethereal divine art, to Zhang Xiaohu. However, Peng immediately rejected his request. Although ethereal divine art was a cultivation technique exclusive to the direct disciples of the Misty School and Zhang Xiaohu was qualified to cultivate it, Zhang Xiaohu hadn't gone through the formal procedures to enter the school. His martial arts aptitude was still unknown. Just his age alone was a big problem. His meridians had already formed, so how could he cultivate ethereal divine art to the realm of Deshang? Peng still hoped that Wenhai could impart other higher-level inner strength mantras to Zhang Xiaohu. This was Wenhai's first time accepting a disciple. He cherished this slightly older disciple and only wanted to give him a good foundation. This was why he begged Peng again and again. Moreover, Peng refused to agree. This resulted in Zhang Xiaohu's situation where no one cared about him even though he had been in the school for almost 2 months. Chapter 192. Actually, it wasn't that Peng didn't want to test Zhang Xiaohu's aptitude, but as the sect leader of the ethereal sect, he was really busy with a myriad of affairs every day. How would he have the time to care about such trivial matters? He couldn't even remember the name of Zhang Xiaohua, the youth who had saved his younger sister. Peng was also an extremely talented person, so how could he not remember a person's name? To Peng, Zhang Xiaohua was a one-off item. Once he thanked him, he would forget about it. In the future, he wouldn't pay attention to him, so why would he bother to remember him? At this moment, Zhang Xiaohu was sparring with Yuan Xing in the arena. It was fine to watch, but why didn't he pay attention to his aptitude? This was Peng's intention as the sect leader, so he paid attention to it. At first, he had the same thought as the other disciples. He felt that Zhang Xiaohu didn't have any redeeming qualities and would be knocked out of the arena soon. However, after chatting with Monk Changgung for a while, he raised his head again and couldn't help but let out an "N." This was the second time he had lost his composure after Zhang Xiaohu went on stage. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua saw the changes in her second brother's fists and kicks. Since Zhang Xiaohua could see it, so could Peng. Perhaps they saw different things, but they were both able to see the change in the situation. The more Zhang Xiaohu fought, the better Peng's mood became. Looking at the fine details, Peng even had a thought. If he didn't use his inner energy, his 6 harmonies fists might not be as accurate as Zhang Xiaohu's, able to find a chance to survive amidst Yuan Xing's chaotic moves. At this moment, Peng's love for talent was aroused. What was a genius? This was the most common 6 harmonies fists in the pugilistic world, taught by the Lotus Escort Agency's 9th-rate guards, was actually able to withstand the various secret fists taught by the Dalan Temple's Law Enforcement Hall's disciples. If this spread to the pugilistic world, the Misty School's reputation would definitely shine, enough to make up for the previous shadow. If the Misty School didn't pay attention to such a genius and didn't give her more responsibilities, it would be intolerable. Thinking of this, Peng raised his head and looked at Wen Wenhai. Wen Wenhai also noticed his master's attention. The two of them looked at each other and nodded. Wen Wenhai's eyes lit up. He knew that his master had approved of Zhang Xiaohu, and he couldn't help but feel happy from the bottom of his heart. Monk Changgung originally did not pay attention to the arena, but when he saw Peng lose his composure, he was also shocked. He quickly turned his head to look at the arena. Who was Monk Changgung? He was an expert of Peng's generation. He immediately saw the difference in Zhang Xiaohu's fist technique. He could not help but cry out in pity. If Yuan Xing had attacked earlier, the competition would have ended long ago. Monk Changgung coughed and asked, "Congratulations, sect master. To think that there would be such a person in ethereal sect. To be able to research the 6 directions fist technique for so many years and persist for so long without using his inner strength, it seems like Yuan Xing has underestimated the heroes of the world." Cough cough, Peng couldn't help but laugh and explained, "This. Master, I have to explain to you. This disciple of the Misty School is called Zhang Xiaohu. He is a direct disciple of our Misty School." Monk Changgung felt somewhat comforted and said, "Yes, not bad. Sect leader has good eyes. To be able to find such a talented disciple and train him for so many years, he will definitely become famous in the pugilistic world." "Oh, right, I don't seem to have heard of this disciple of sect leader Peng's expression was somewhat strange as he said, "Master, you misunderstood. This Zhang Xiaohu was taken in by my disciple, Wen Wenhai." "Wen Wenhai's disciple?" Monk Changgung was stunned and said, "From what I see, Zhang Xiaohu is quite old. He isn't much younger than Wen Wenhai. Could it be that Wen Wenhai took him in as a disciple when he was young?" Peng smiled and said, "It's like this. Zhang Xiaohu wasn't nurtured by my Misty School since he was young. His situation is similar to that of your Misty School's disciple, Yuan Xing, who entered my Misty School after he grew up." Without waiting for Peng to finish, Monk Changgung interrupted and asked, "Is that so? Then, how did Zhang Xiaohu cultivate his inner force cultivation method? Sect leader if you have any good methods, please enlighten me." Monk Changgung was also concerned about Yuan Xing. When he heard that Zhang Xiaohu had also entered the sect halfway, he naturally wanted to know how he cultivated the Misty School's inner force. However, Peng smiled bitterly and said, "Master, this Zhang Xiaohu has only been in the sect for 2 months. He hasn't started cultivating his inner force yet. His situation is similar to Yuan Xing's. I haven't considered this matter yet. Only been in the sect for 2 months." Monk Changgung was surprised and asked, "Then how long has he been practicing martial arts? Has he never cultivated inner force before?" Peng said, "Just now, my disciple Zhang Xiaohu also told me that this Zhang Xiaohu seemed to have just started practicing martial arts last summer. His inner force cultivation method is also the most common in the martial arts world. He cultivated it for 2 months and stopped practicing after entering the Misty School. Also, to tell you the truth, this Zhang Xiaohu only knows this set of 6 harmonies fist technique. He hasn't started practicing the other fist techniques of the Misty School." "What?" Monk Changgung was shocked again and said, "He only knows this set of fist techniques. No wonder he kept using the 6 harmonies fist in the arena. I should have thought of this long ago." Immediately, Monk Changgung wrung his hands and said, "How did such a talent end up in the Misty School?" Peng heard this and was very unhappy. He thought to himself, "What? Why can't we find Zhang Xiaohu just because you found Yuan Xing? Why can't our Misty School find a talent?" Peng smiled apologetically and said, Master, even if he's a talent, he's already an adult. If he can't cultivate his inner force, it's useless. I don't know what this youth's future path will be. Monk Changgung smiled and said, Sect leader O is right. If you don't like him, then give him to our Dalan temple. He just entered the Misty School and hasn't learned anything yet. What do you think? Peng said, Master, you must be joking. Since he's already entered the Misty School, he's a student of the Misty School. When he dies, he'll be a dead person of the Misty School. How can he enter another school? Absolutely not. Monk Changgung smiled and didn't say anything else. On the arena, the battle between Yuan Xing and Zhang Xiaohu entered a new stage. Although Yuan Xing's moves were varied and dazzling, Zhang Xiaohu only used the simple 6 harmonies fist techniques. His attack and defense were good, and he didn't fall into a disadvantage at all. However, if one were to say that Zhang Xiaohu could win by attacking, it would be beyond his capabilities. However, it was impossible to let Yuan Xing defeat Zhang Xiaohu. Thereupon, the two of them fought for a while longer. That Yuan Xing showed an opening and jumped out of the ring. He put his palms together and said, After fighting for so long, I can see that you only know one set of Liu Hequan. Zhang Xiaohu withdrew his fists and legs and said with a smile, That's right. Yuan Xing nodded and said, In that case, I've lost. Using so many fist techniques, I can't beat a mere 6 harmonies fist. You're better than me. Zhang Xiaohu said, Thousands of fists and legs, one set of fist techniques. They're all fist techniques, and there's no difference. Since it's a competition, there's no winner, so it's not a loss. Master, what do you think? Yuan Xing's expression changed and he said, I've been thinking too much. Alright, you're Zhang Xiaohu, right? I'll remember you. Today we're tied. If there's a chance in the future, we'll compete again. Zhang Xiaohu hurriedly cupped his fists and said, That's my intention. I'll also remember Master's Dharma name, Yuan Xing. I'll wait for our next meeting. After saying that, Yuan Xing jumped off the arena and returned to the reed mat shelter. Zhang Xiaohu also jumped off. The Misty School disciples cheered thunderously and applauded to welcome him. Zhang Xiaohu looked at the fervent gazes of the disciples, big and small, and his eyes were a little moist. At this moment, whether it was the disciples who thought they were virtuous and didn't want to interact with Zhang Xiaohu, or the disciples who were opportunistic and wanted to curry favor with Zhang Xiaohu, all of them had a new understanding of him. At this moment, the Misty School disciples truly treated Zhang Xiaohu as their brother from the bottom of their hearts. They didn't have the cold and distant attitude they had in the past. At this moment, the Misty School disciples truly admired their sect leader from the bottom of their hearts. She really had a discerning eye for heroes. Not to mention that Zhang Xiaohu received a hero's welcome, Monk Yuan Xing also walked back to the reed mat shelter with steady steps. Monk Changgung asked with concern, Yuan Xing, victory and defeat are common in battle. There's no need to take it to heart. Yuan Xing put his palms together and bowed, Thank you for your concern, elder. Victory is defeat, defeat is victory. How can the matters of the world be so clearly differentiated? This time, I've learned a lot from fighting with Zhang Xiaohu from the Misty School. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Monk Changgung was very satisfied when he heard this. He waved his hand and had Yuan Xing leave. Yuan Xing had just walked back to the group of monks when Yuan Kong jumped out and called out, Martial Granduncle, senior brother Yuan Xing has already done one round. Shouldn't it be my turn next? Peng smiled, Little master, you just fought a battle. Rest a bit more. This Zhang Xiaohua isn't a disciple of the Misty School. The battle just now was for him to participate in the martial arts exhibition, so he naturally had to participate. Since he has already passed, I can't make decisions for him in the following battles. No matter what, I still have to listen to Zhang Xiaohua's opinion. Monk Changgung was puzzled, Zhang Xiaohua. Why does it sound like he's a family member with Zhang Xiaohu? Why isn't he a disciple of the Misty School? How can he participate in the martial arts exhibition? Oh Peng thought to himself, your Dalan Temple is participating in the martial arts exhibition. Zhang Xiaohua is from the Huanxi Mountain Villa. Why can't he participate? However, he still patiently explained the reason Zhang Xiaohua was participating in the martial arts exhibition and his relationship with Zhang Xiaohu. Monk Changgung nodded as he listened. Since that's the case, Zhang Xiaohua is Zhang Xiaohu's younger brother. Presumably, his aptitude is also not ordinary. His martial arts must be good. Just now, I was in a hurry and didn't see it clearly. I really want to see it again. Moreover, he isn't a disciple of the Misty School right now, but presumably he won't be in the future. Don't you agree, sect leader O? Hearing Chang Gung's overbearing words, O Peng smiled bitterly. You're right. I'll go and persuade him. But O Peng changed the topic and said, Master, your disciples have already sparred with my ethereal sect's disciples. I wonder if there are any other arrangements after this competition. Monk Chang Gung still had that dead man's expression. He said in a neutral tone, let's talk about it after this match. Oh Peng was helpless. He beckoned Zhang Qingyue over and gave him a few instructions. Then, he let Zhang Qingyue bring Monk Yuan Kong back to the first arena. When the two jumped onto the arena, Zhang Qingyue also called Zhang Xiaohua up. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua climb onto the arena with a face full of confusion, Zhang Qingyue smiled and said to him, Zhang Xiaohua, I'm here on the orders of the sect leader to ask you. The match you just fought was already your last match in the martial arts exhibition. You've already won. Zhang Xiaohua said happily, really? Is there a reward? I need to give it to you now. Zhang Qingyue shook his head, we'll talk about the reward later. I called you up for something else. Zhang Xiaohua nodded, what is it? Just say it. Zhang Qingyue pointed at Yuan Kong beside him, this is the senior brother of Yuan Liao you just defeated, young Master Yuan Kong. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly bowed, greetings, Master Yuan Kong. Yuan Kong also put his palms together and returned the greeting, not saying anything. Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled, this little bald donkey is actually not saying anything. He must have something against me. I wonder how I've offended him. Zhang Qingyue continued, this young Master Yuan Kong saw that you defeated his junior brother Yuan. He's itching to spar with you again. What do you think? Sect leader O said that if you don't want to fight, you don't have to. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua secretly curled his lips, thinking, he beat up the younger one and brought out the older one. The older one didn't come out, but the older one came out. Looks like he wants to take revenge and regain his face. Yuan Liao is already so powerful, so this senior brother of his must be even more incredible. I'm probably not his match. If it's still a draw, I'll have a chance. But sect leader O said that if I don't want to fight, I don't have to. Why should I find this awkward? Just as he was about to refuse, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind, causing him to exclaim, that's not right. If I don't have to fight, Zhang Qingyue wouldn't have brought this little bald donkey up to the stage. Besides, he even specially said sect leader O's words. He must be being sarcastic. Alas, I heard everyone talking about this Dalan Temple being a big sect that Misty School can't afford to offend. Sect leader O probably can't refuse, so he let me come up. If I refuse, won't I ruin sect leader O's face? After he finished thinking, Zhang Xiaohua cupped his hands and said, Martial Uncle Zhang, I'm willing to fight with this young master. Zhang Qingyue was overjoyed when he heard this. He had received O Peng's order to persuade Zhang Xiaohua to participate in the competition, but he couldn't say it so bluntly in front of her. If Zhang Xiaohua really didn't understand and directly refused, it would be difficult for him. Now that he saw Zhang Xiaohua was very tactful and didn't need to say too much nonsense, he exhorted, Zhang Xiaohua, this young Master Yuan Kong is very powerful. He already won a match just now. You must have seen it too, so you must be more careful in a while. Once he finished speaking, Zhang Qingyue didn't leave. He flashed and stood in a corner of the stage. When Yuan Kong saw that Zhang Xiaohua agreed to the competition, he narrowed his eyes and got into a stance, ready to fight. When Zhang Xiaohua saw his stance, she wasn't in a hurry and repeatedly waved her hand at Yuan Kong. Yuan Kong was puzzled and asked, "Since you've already agreed to the competition, why haven't you started?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Although I've agreed to the competition with sect leader O, I still have a condition. I'll only start if you agree to it." Yuan Kong frowned and said, "I'm not in the mood to talk about conditions with you. Haven't you already agreed to the competition? What conditions do I need to talk about with you?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled mysteriously and said, "I've agreed to the competition with you, but if you don't agree to my condition, I'll immediately jump off the stage as soon as we fight. Just treat it as if I've lost. What do you think?" When Yuan Kong heard this, his face turned abnormally gloomy. He clenched his teeth and said, "You're really despicable. You actually used such a trick." Zhang Xiaohua smiled shamelessly and said, "Winning or losing is my business. Why do you care so much?" Yuan Kong clenched his teeth and said, "Then what conditions do you have?" Zhang Xiaohua tilted her head and thought for a moment before saying, "It's nothing. If you lose, you have to teach me a sword technique from your Dalan temple." For example, when she said this, Zhang Xiaohua didn't know what sword technique to say. At this moment, Zhang Qingyue, who was standing to the side, said, "Zhang Xiaohua, are you talking about the Dharma sword? I've often heard that the Dalan temple's Dharma sword technique is very powerful. I'm sure you admire it as much as I do." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she immediately said, "That's right. It's the Dharma sword. I've long heard that this sword technique is world-shaking. I really want to see it for myself." When Yuan Kong heard this, his face turned red with anger and he said, "You're going too far. This Dharma sword is a secret of the Dalan temple. I haven't even learned it, so how can I teach it to you? That won't do." Zhang Xiaohua took the opportunity to say, "Then let me see the sword manual." Yuan Kong still shook his head and refused to agree. When Zhang Xiaohua saw this, she pretended to jump off the arena and said, "Since we can't come to an agreement, then it's my loss. You can return to the court victorious." When Yuan Kong saw this, he hurriedly shouted, "Don't go down first. I'll go ask Grand Marshal Uncle first." With that, he used his qinggong and disappeared back to the reed mat shelter. When Monk Changgung heard this condition, he was also in a difficult position. The Dharma sword technique couldn't be taught to outsiders. How could he let Zhang Xiaohua cultivate it? However, if he didn't regain the Dalan temple's reputation because of this, Monk Changgung would be unwilling. Therefore, he rolled his eyes and asked, "Do you have absolute confidence in defeating him?" Yuan Kong clenched his fists and said, "I will definitely win. Actually, junior brother Yuan Liao can defeat him. It was just a moment of carelessness." When Monk Changgung heard this, he nodded and whispered a few words into his ear. When Yuan Kong heard this, he smiled and said, "Thank you, Grand Marshal Uncle." With that said, he hurriedly returned to the arena. When Zhang Xiaohua saw him return, she happily said, "How was it? Did you agree?" Yuan Kong smiled and said, "As you wish. However, I don't know the Dharma sword technique. You can only look at the sword manual. This sword manual is a secret of our Dalan temple. When we let you look at it, we took a risk. Therefore, after you finish reading it, you must not draw it out, nor can you dictate it to others, much less teach it to others. What do you think?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Of course. I just want to look at it. Why do I have to teach it to others?" Yuan Kong continued, "I'm not done yet. You can look at the Dharma sword technique, but you can only look at it once. More than half a time is not allowed. What do you think? If you can't, you can jump off the arena and we'll go our separate ways." Chapter 193. I'm ashamed. 5K a day is the limit, any more and I won't be able to do it. If it's split into 2 chapters, each chapter is 3K. Wouldn't it be a problem of being fickle and fickle? Moreover, I've always been very lazy. If I upload once, I won't think about it. If I upload more, I might not be able to remember. The most important thing is that I'm not a full-time writer and only use my free time to write. Right now, I'm writing this message at 22:13. I have to work during the day and can only write at night. Everyone, please bear with me. Oh right, the little girl's ticket actually brought me 5 yuan. I only saw it recently. Thank you. I hope you can urge me to upload one more time and gather 2 yuan. Then I can go buy a lottery ticket. Also, thank you all for reading my novel. Hee hee. Also, if any readers are familiar with Qidian's editors, please recommend them. Hee hee. Zhang Xiaohua said, how can a monk bargain like this? He really doesn't have any self-restraint. Sky Origin didn't bicker with him and only asked if he agreed. Zhang Xiaohua thought to herself, isn't it just reading it once? When the time comes, I'll read it carefully. I'll take half a day to read a page. Let's see what you say then. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua pretended to be tricked. She was very angry and said loudly, just read it once. However, you have to let me read it myself. Sky Origin didn't suspect her and naturally agreed. Hearing Sky Origin agree, Zhang Xiaohua got into a fighting stance, but Sky Origin didn't move. Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled, this little master, we've already agreed on the price. Why aren't you making a move? Sky Origin frowned and said, we've been talking for half a day and you're the one who wins. What should I do? But if I win, what will you do? Zhang Xiaohua laughed mischievously, if you win, I'll just jump down from this stage. Sky Origin shook his head and said, that's too easy for you. It's not appropriate. When Zhang Xiaohua saw Yuankang dawdling, she giggled and said, then think about it carefully. I'll go down to eat first. Let's count this as my loss. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua was about to go down again, Sky Origin hurriedly stopped her. Don't. I don't want your prize, okay? When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she stopped in her tracks and said, Monk Yuna, I know you want to teach me a lesson and avenge your junior brother. I'm giving you and the Dalan Temple face by going up on stage. Stop nagging and start fighting. I'm in a hurry. Zhang Xiaohua knew that Yuankang wanted to regain face for the Dalan Temple. Moreover, he was conceited that he would definitely win against her. That was why he repeatedly waited for the highest bid. She had grasped Yuankang's weakness and forced him to lower his head again and again. In fact, Zhang Xiaohua also understood that she was just a farm boy from Huanxi Manor. She did not have any master. Even if she lost, there was nothing to lose. Anyway, she had already lost a lot of face. Why would she be afraid of one more time? The voices of the 2 people on the stage were not loud. When they were close enough, they could naturally hear them. They could not help but snicker in their hearts. This guy was really shameless. Oh Peng and the others who were far away were puzzled. They did not know what the 2 were talking about. However, the people in the square, including Zhang Xiaohu, did not have any hope for Zhang Xiaohua. Even if Zhang Xiaohua was a genius, how long had she been practicing martial arts? She had just happened to pass the challenge of a second-order commoner. Who was her opponent? It was someone who could easily defeat a third-order commoner. However, it was also because of this that everyone relaxed and wanted to see the farce on the stage. On the stage, Yuankang put his palms together and saluted. This little monk is Yuankang from the Dalan Temple. Please enlighten me. Zhang Xiaohua also cupped her fists and saluted. This little one is Zhang Xiaohua from Huanxi Manor. Please enlighten me. After saluting, the 2 of them got into their respective stances. With a loud shout, they quickly stepped forward and began to fight with their fists and palms. The little monk Yuan Kong learned from Yuan Liao's lesson. The first thing he used was the palm technique he was best at, Skunda exorcism palm. The Skunda exorcism palm was a secret martial art of the Dalan Temple. It was complemented by a set of profound inner strength mantras. The mantras were divided into 9 layers. Each layer would increase one's inner strength by several folds. It was said that when one reached the 9th layer, they would have the power to exorcise demons. There were few opponents in Jianghu. The masters of the Dalan Temple who had reached the 9th layer of the Skunda exorcism palm were all famous in Jianghu. Ever since Yuan Kong started cultivating, he had been practicing this set of inner strength mantras. He had already reached the 3rd layer. Among the younger generation of disciples in the Dalan Temple, he was also very famous. The Skunda exorcism palm was extremely powerful. Monk Yuan Kong also thought highly of himself. When they were fighting on the stage, he did not use it at all. Even then, he won easily. This time, it seemed that he hated Zhang Xiaohua to the core. He used his best move right from the start. In Yuan Kong's mind, his Skunda exorcism palm was not something that this country bumpkin Zhang Xiaohua could withstand. With this palm strike, wouldn't the inner strength contained in his palm strike send Zhang Xiaohua flying several zhang? If he could directly send her off the stage, it would also show that his inner strength was extraordinary. But who would have thought that when their fists and palms collided, both of them felt an astonishing amount of power from each other's hands. With a bang, Monk Yuan Kong did not move at all. Zhang Xiaohua took 3 steps back. Both of their faces were filled with shock. Soon after, they revealed expressions of joy at the same time. They once again waved their fists and palms and fought. The competition on the stage this time was different from the past. In other competitions on the stage, everyone cared about winning or losing. They racked their brains and used strategies and tactics to play to their strengths and avoid their weaknesses. However, for these two, one of them was much stronger than his opponent and did not have the slightest intention of underestimating his opponent. They did not hold back in their palm techniques and the circulation of their inner strength. The other did not care about winning or losing at all. There was no need to talk about strategies, so they did not use their full strength in their fists and kicks. As a result, palipala sounds could be heard from the stage. It was actually the sound of force colliding with force. The situation was extremely explosive and it was truly out of everyone's expectations. The battle between Zhang Xiaohu and Yuan Xing was said to have ended in a draw. This had indeed allowed the Misty School to regain some face. However, in reality, Zhang Xiaohu had been suppressed from the start and did not have much strength to retaliate. Most importantly, they did not use their inner strength in their competition. Although their moves looked good, their power was lacking. This made these hot-blooded youths who used their inner strength all day long to bombard others feel unsatisfied. When they said that it was a draw in the end, they were all happy. However, to be honest, there was a lack of excitement in their happiness. And now, looking at this young man who had just kicked a handsome little monk off the stage, he went on stage to challenge a dark and coarse monk who had easily defeated their own brother. Just based on this courage, they first praised him in their hearts. The happiest thing was that this brother went on stage to fight force with his opponent. This kind of fighting style immediately ignited the passion in the blood of the youths. Their eyes were bloodshot as they looked at Zhang Xiaohua, who was continuously waving his fists around on the stage. They immediately felt that he was incomparably pleasing to the eye. What was this, a warrior? Calling him brother was really very considerate. Thus, someone shouted, "Brother, do your best. Brother, rise up." The crowd below the stage all responded. The sound of "rise up" immediately reverberated through the hall. At this moment, if O Peng, the great sect leader O, felt astonished when he saw Zhang Xiaohu fight Yuan Xing to a draw, then he was now deeply shocked. To be honest, although Zhang Xiaohu's draw was very brilliant and unexpected, that kind of fighting style without internal energy could only show a person's aptitude. From a literary point of view, it was purely theoretical research. The theory might be strong, but it might not be feasible in practice. In other words, if Zhang Xiaohu really did cultivate internal energy, he might not be as powerful as Yuan Kong. A fist technique without internal energy was just a formality, a castle in the air. As long as it was slightly damaged by internal energy, it would definitely suffer a crushing defeat. This was also why Chang Gung specially mentioned the meaning of special when he mentioned Yuan Xing. Today was truly a day of glory for the Zhang brothers. Peng couldn't help but secretly ask himself, one surprise after another. I wonder how many more surprises the Zhang brothers can give me. Peng had previously heard some things about Zhang Xiaohua from his sister. For example, his arm strength was astonishing. However, for a sect leader like Peng who had seen countless outstanding talents, it really didn't count for much. Just Tang Shi from Young Eagle Hall alone was better than Zhang Xiaohua. Moreover, this strength was cultivated from a young age using medicinal herbs. Although Zhang Xiaohua had some strength, without a good foundation, his future progress was still limited. Therefore, Peng had never thought highly of Zhang Xiaohua. However, in today's battle, he discovered that Zhang Xiaohua's arm strength seemed to be much greater than what was previously said. Either the rumors were wrong, or Zhang Xiaohua's arm strength had increased. Naturally, Peng's thoughts leaned towards the former. He wasn't naive enough to believe that in just a few months, Zhang Xiaohua's arm strength could have improved greatly without the nourishment of medicinal herbs. However, even if Peng didn't have any hopes of getting lucky in this extremely unfair competition, the contest between Zhang Xiaohua and Yuan Kong at the beginning still shocked him. He smiled and said to monk Chang Gung, "Congratulations, great master, this young master Yuan Kong's Skunda exorcism palm should be at the 3rd or 4th level. With such a high cultivation at such a young age, it won't be long before he will be a bright star blooming in Jianghu." Monk Chang Gung was so happy that he couldn't close his mouth. His purpose in coming to the Misty School was to show off the strength of the disciplinary hall and fiercely show off his power to Peng. He wanted to take revenge on the Misty School for taking down the Luo Shui gang one step ahead of them, causing the disciplinary hall's long-planned plan to go down the drain. Of course, this was only limited to the disciplinary hall's prestige. It wasn't the entire Dalan Temple's prestige that had been overturned. Otherwise, the disciples here wouldn't have only sent out low-level disciples to disturb the martial arts exhibition. It would have been an elite disciple against a core disciple. Then again, if that was the case, how would Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu have the opportunity to put on a show of individual martial arts? The monk Chang Gung accepted Peng's flattery with ease. He replied in an indecent manner, "This disciple of your ethereal sect is not bad. Even though he doesn't know any inner strength, he was born with great strength. Coupled with this messy fist technique, he was actually able to fight Yuan Xing to a standstill. This is really unexpected. However, his fist technique is also strange. No matter how you look at it, it's awkward. Look at the moves of the Yoha fist, they're not properly executed and are crooked. Also, that kick seems to be a technique of the Tan family. It's also similar to our Dalan Temple's peacock fanning tail. That's right, look at this move. It's very familiar and is somewhat similar to a move of the Skunda exorcism palm. What kind of fist technique is this? Chief O, how did you teach this fist technique? How come I didn't know that you had this fist technique?" Peng's heart skipped a beat when he heard that. He knew about Zhang Xiaohua's jumbled fist technique and naturally thought that he had poor talent. He thought that it was just a passing remark. But now that he heard monk Changgung's comments, he naturally paid attention to it. He watched it carefully and didn't even hear Changgung's final question. When monk Chang Gung saw how rude Peng was and how he didn't seem to have heard his question, he was slightly angered. He secretly cursed a few times and also watched the competition on the stage. Zhang Xiaohua was also lucky. If she encountered monk Yuan Kong a few days ago, she would definitely lose after a few moves. However, This person just had a few battles a few days ago and had just refined the Big Dipper mystical fist. Now that his fighting spirit was high, he couldn't wait to meet some experts and properly hone his beloved Big Dipper mystical fist. In the time it took to eat half a meal, the two of them were evenly matched. Although it was said that they were evenly matched, there was actually a difference. Zhang Xiaohua used all her skills and didn't hold back. Of course, she didn't hold anything back either. On the other hand, Monk Yuan Kong only used the skills that he was proud of and had many other moves that he didn't use. As a matter of fact, when Monk Yuan saw that his Skunda exorcism palm didn't succeed, he pondered about other methods. Sealing acupoints. This was the first thing that came to Monk Yuan Kong's mind. It wasn't just because sealing acupoints was a profound martial art that very few low-level disciples knew. It was a sharp weapon that could be used to kill. Most importantly, if he was too far away, he would lose his front leg. If he could defeat Zhang Xiaohua with this, he would be able to redeem the Dalan Temple's lost face. Thinking of this, Monk Yuan Kong stopped his palm technique and used the Dalan Temple's martial art, Winding Silk Grappling Hand. The power of this grappling hand was mediocre, but its advantage was that the moves were short and quick. It was almost untraceable. However, Zhang Xiaohua was no longer the same as before. How could he get close to her? Last time, he was too far away because he was caught off guard. If it was a real competition, how could she let him directly seal all 36 major acupoints on her body? After fighting like this for a while, Monk Yuan Kong revealed a slight opening. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. She took a step forward and sent a punch over. Unexpectedly, Monk Yuan Kong was already prepared. With a somersault in the air, he flipped over Zhang Xiaohua's head. Zhang Xiaohua raised her hand to the sky. Monk Yuan Kong's qigong was also exceptional. He had already leaped over. While he was in midair, he used his fingers to strike 3 acupoints on Zhang Xiaohua's neck. If it was any other opponent, that opponent would naturally be paralyzed on the ground and be at the mercy of others. However, Monk Yuan Kong had learned from Yuan Liao's mistake and didn't dare to trust himself too much. He still moved back, wanting to get out of the safe area as soon as possible. Sure enough, Zhang Xiaohua didn't collapse as he had expected. Instead, she raised her hand to strike. Immediately after, she spun around and kicked Monk Yuan Kong's 2 fingers with her left foot. Seeing this, Monk Yuan was both surprised and delighted. He was surprised that his acupoint sealing technique actually didn't hit Zhang Xiaohua. He didn't know the reason for this. Was it because his acupoints weren't sealed properly? Or did Zhang Xiaohua practice a hard qigong similar to iron shirt? But even if Zhang Xiaohua practiced a hard qigong, it was impossible for her to achieve great success at such a young age. How could she not be afraid of his acupoint sealing? Moreover, this brat seemed to have said that he didn't know any internal energy. Could it be that he was deliberately trying to confuse others? What made Monk Yuan happy was that when the left foot kicked over, wasn't the Yongquan acupoint under her foot placed right in front of his eyes? Wasn't it obvious that she was giving it to him? The Yongquan acupoint was a major acupoint. If it was really hit, not only would it break Zhang Xiaohua's internal energy, oh, I forgot, this brat didn't have any internal energy at all. But at the very least, it would make him temporarily lose his ability to fight. Just as Monk Yuan was pondering the crucial question of whether or not to strike, Zhang Xiaohua's vigorous foot had already arrived in front of his face. The sole of her foot was placed right in front of Monk Yuan Kong. Monk Yuan Kong reflexively pressed his fingers together and actually used all his strength. However, reality once again exceeded Monk Yuan Kong's expectations. Although his slender fingers were filled with internal energy, they were still fingers and not fists. They met Zhang Xiaohua's foot head-on. Although the acupoint was extremely accurate and it really was the Yongquan acupoint, Monk Yuan Kong felt as if he had struck an iron plate. A sharp pain transmitted from his fingers. Monk Yuan Kong sucked in a breath of cold air and quickly retracted his right arm. He exerted strength in his feet and like a reed crossing a river, he floated to the side of the arena. Only then did he carefully look at his fingers. He saw that his fingers were already red and in incomparable pain. It was as if they were swollen. Zhang Xiaohua saw that monk Yuan Kong had jumped to the side and didn't chase after him. She only felt that it was strange. Why did this dark and coarse little monk have the same problem as that fair and clean little monk? They both liked to randomly poke others with their fingers. Last time, that monk had poked her body more than 30 times before standing there in a daze, waiting for her to kick his butt. This time, this monk did it again. Not only did he poke her neck twice, he even wanted to poke her stinky feet as if he wasn't satisfied. What kind of problem was this? In her impression, the shrews of the Guozhuang house only used their fingers when they were quarreling. They only randomly poked each other's faces, but this group of monks randomly poked their bodies. Presumably, this was also a kind of improvement. No wonder the ancients said that only monks and women were difficult to raise. Presumably, this was the meaning behind it. Seeing that his acupoint sealing had failed, monk Yuan was greatly shocked. This great shock was not only psychological, but also physical. He didn't know what kind of martial arts this Zhang Xiaohua practiced. Her entire body was like an iron plate and she wasn't afraid of having her acupoints sealed. Perhaps when his skunda exorcism palm reached the 9th level, he would be able to circulate his internal energy and use it to seal her acupoints. Moreover, his fingers were clearly injured. It would greatly affect his future competition. While monk Yuan was greatly shocked, Zhang Xiaohua opened her mouth and said, "Little monk Yuan Kong, your fingers are injured. Why don't you hurry and bandage them? Don't leave any sequelae. In the future, you won't be able to hold chopsticks properly. You won't even be able to hold pork belly properly." Monk Yuan was originally greatly shocked, but after hearing these words, he became furious. He shouted, "Ba! Zhang Xiaohua, don't make irresponsible remarks. How can monks eat meat? We are usually vegetarians." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she stuck out her tongue. She knew that she had made a mistake. She bowed and said, "Little master, please don't blame me. I know my mistake and forgot about this. Please forgive me." Monk Yuan waved his uninjured hand and said, "Forget it, forget it." Zhang Xiaohua said, "I can't forget it. As an apology, I'll give you some time. Take care of your fingers first, then we'll compete." When monk Yuan heard this, he smiled and said, "Many thanks, little benefactor." After saying this, he was just about to take out the Dalan Temple's secret healing ointment when he heard Zhang Xiaohua mutter in a small voice, "Pork belly really does taste good. This little monk really doesn't have the luck to eat it." When monk Yuan heard this, he fell to the ground with a thud and nearly fainted. Fortunately, there was still some distance from the edge of the arena. Otherwise, Zhang Xiaohua would have won without a fight. At this moment, the Misty School's gang leader did not see such a wonderful farce at all. He only frowned tightly, as if he was thinking about something.